You want to know what real power looks like? It ain't about fangs or bloodlines or who can shift faster when the moon rises. Real power is standing in front of a council that wants you dead and refusing to flinch. This is the story of a girl who was born wrong in a world that worships strength, sent north to die with dignity, and instead became the one thing no empire can survive without. Stick with me till the end. This gets darker before it gets better. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. Let's build this tribe together. The council chamber smelled like old stone and older blood. Lysera Vale stood in the center of the floor, bare feet against marble, so cold it burned, and tried to remember how to breathe like she wasn't drowning. 47 pairs of eyes watched her from the darkness beyond the torchlight. 47 shifters who could taste fear in the air like perfume. She gave them nothing. Her father sat on the obsidian throne, third from the left in the semicircle of seats that curved around her like teeth. He hadn't looked at her once since the guards brought her in. That told her everything she needed to know about how this would end. Lord Heswick rose first. He always did. The man loved the sound of his own voice the way wolves loved fresh meat. You understand why you're here, girl? Lysera kept her chin level. She'd learned young that submission invited violence in Dravenhall. I understand you're about to tell me. Heswick's smile didn't reach his eyes. Nothing about him ever did. He was the kind of man who measured power in how many people flinched when he entered a room. Your 21st year approaches. By law and tradition, you should have manifested by now. Your wolf should have emerged. Your power should have shown itself. He paused, let the silence stretch until it sharpened into something that could cut. It hasn't. Lysera said nothing. What was there to say? They all knew. The whole kingdom knew. The Vale line had produced apex shifters for 11 generations, warriors who could tear through enemy ranks like paper, alphas who commanded submission with a glance. And then they'd produced her. Human, powerless, flawed. Your father has been patient, Heswick continued, pacing now, playing to the gallery. The council has been patient. We've allowed you to remain here, in the heart of our kingdom, despite your condition. We've protected you, fed you, given you the privileges of your bloodline, even though you cannot honor it. The air in the chamber shifted. Lysera felt it before she understood it. This wasn't a trial. Trials had outcomes that weren't predetermined. This was theater. But patience has limits, Heswick said, and wars have costs. She looked at her father then, forced him to meet her eyes. He did, finally, and what she saw there was worse than hate. It was relief. The kind of relief that comes when a problem finally offers its own solution. The North grows restless, her father said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who'd made his choice before the sun rose. King Kael'thorn Virex has proposed an alliance, a marriage bond to solidify the treaty between our kingdoms. Lysera's stomach dropped. Marriage in shifter culture wasn't romance. It was politics written in bloodlines and sealed with bites that marked you as property. You're sending me to Kael'thorn. It wasn't a question. We're offering you, her father corrected. There's a difference. There wasn't. They both knew it. Counselor Drentha spoke from the shadows, her voice like silk wrapped around a blade. The Northern Territories have what we need. Resources, strategic positioning, the kind of power that wins wars before they start. But Virex doesn't negotiate. He consumes. The only language he speaks is dominance. So you're feeding me to him, Lysera said flatly. We're positioning you, Drentha replied, carefully, as a gesture of good faith from a kingdom that values alliance. Lysera laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, sharp and bitter. Good faith. You're throwing away the daughter who can't shift and calling it diplomacy. Heswick moved faster than she expected. One moment he was across the chamber. The next his hand was around her throat, lifting her until her toes scraped marble. You will show respect, he hissed, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. You exist because we allow it. You breathe because we permit it. And you will serve this kingdom in the only way you're capable of serving. He dropped her. Lysera hit the ground hard, caught herself on her palms, and rose without showing the pain screaming through her knees. This is survival, girl, Heswick said, adjusting his collar like he'd done nothing more violent than swat a fly. Yours and ours. Kael'thorn gets a bride from a bloodline he respects. We get a treaty. Everyone wins. Except me. Her father stood. The council chamber fell silent. "You leave at dawn," he said. 3 days' ride north. You'll be accompanied by an honor guard until you reach the border. After that, you belong to Virex." He turned to leave, dismissed her with his shoulders the way you'd dismiss a servant. "Father." He stopped. Didn't turn around. "Did you ever love me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer, might give her something, anything, that felt like truth. Instead, he walked out. The guards came for her before the council finished filing out. They didn't touch her with violence, but they didn't need to. The message was clear. She wasn't a prisoner. She was cargo. The walk back to her chambers felt longer than it ever had. Lysera's throat still burned where Heswick's fingers had pressed. She could feel the bruises forming, dark promises blooming under her skin. The guards flanked her through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, and every step felt like walking toward an execution that was taking its time arriving. She'd known this was coming. Deep down, in the place where truth lives when you're too scared to look at it directly. She'd known since she turned 16 and her wolf never came. The whispers had started then. Quiet at first, like wind through cracks in stone. Then louder. Bolder. Broken, they'd said. Defective. A stain on the bloodline. Her chambers felt different now that she knew she was leaving them. Lysera stood at the window overlooking Dravenhall's sprawl and tried to memorize the black glass towers catching stormlight like they were made of frozen lightning. 21 years in this city. 21 years of being the wrong daughter in the right family. Her maid, Kara, was already there, packing with the kind of frantic energy that came from fear barely held in check. The girl was 16 and scared of everything, but she'd been kind to Lysera when kindness wasn't required. That counted for something. "They say he's a monster," Kara whispered, folding a dress that Lysera would probably never wear. "King Kael'thorn. They say he killed his own father to take the throne. They say he eats the hearts of defeated alphas to steal their power." Lysera turned from the window, looked at this girl who'd braided her hair and brought her tea and never once asked why she was broken. "They say a lot of things," Lysera replied. "Most of them are designed to make you afraid." "Are you? Afraid?" Lysera considered the question, turned it over in her mind like a stone she was trying to polish smooth. "Fear's just information," she said finally. "Tells you where the danger is. What you do with that information is what matters." Kara looked at her with something between admiration and pity. "You're braver than they say." "No," Lysera corrected. "I'm just out of options. There's a difference." She moved to her wardrobe, pushed aside the gowns and formal wear that marked her as nobility. At the back, hidden behind silk and ceremony, she found what she was looking for. Traveling clothes, simple, practical, the kind of thing you could move in if you needed to run or fight or just survive. She changed while Kara worked, and with each piece of finery she removed, she felt something shift, like she was shedding a skin that had never quite fit. The council dress went first, pooling on the floor like spilled ink. Then the jewelry, the markers of a bloodline she'd never truly belonged to. By the time she was done, she looked almost ordinary, almost human in the way the word was meant, not as an insult, but as a fact. "My lady," Kara said softly, "you'll need this." She held out a cloak, heavy wool, lined with fur, the kind of thing made for northern cold that cut to the bone. Lysera took it, felt the weight settle across her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Kara's eyes filled with tears she was too well trained to shed. "I'll pray for you." "Don't," Lysera said, not unkindly. "Save your prayers for people who believe they work." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on her balcony and watched the kingdom breathe below her. Dravenhall never truly slept. There were always fires burning in the forges, always guards patrolling the ramparts, always the distant howl of shifters running the perimeter, keeping the wild things at bay. Her brother found her there an hour before dawn. Torian was everything she wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that glowed amber when his wolf rode close to the surface. He'd manifested at 13, early even by Apex standards. By 15, he'd led his first hunt. By 18, he'd killed an insurgent alpha in single combat and eaten his heart in front of the council. He was the son their father had always wanted. He sat beside her without asking permission, legs dangling over the edge of the balcony like they were children again. before the world had sorted them into categories of useful and broken. I tried to stop it, he said quietly. Lysera didn't look at him. If she looked at him, she might break, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't break until she was far enough north that no one from Dravenhall could see it. I know, Father wouldn't listen. Said it was the best option. The only option. He's probably right. Torian's jaw clenched. She could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin, the wolf just under the surface wanting to tear something apart. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. We could run. Take the eastern roads, disappear into the territories where council law doesn't reach. I've got contacts, safe houses. We could... And then what? Lysera interrupted. We live like rogues, hunted by every pack between here and the coast? You'd give up everything for me? Without hesitation. She looked at him then, really looked. Saw the truth in his face, the kind of truth that doesn't lie even when it wants to. That's why you can't come with me, she said softly, because you'd actually do it. You'd throw away the throne and the power and the future, and I can't let you make that choice. Not for me. Lysera, I mean it, Torian. You stay. You lead. You be the son he needs because someone in this family has to survive what's coming. What's coming? She didn't answer. Didn't know how to put into words the feeling that had been growing in her chest since the council named her fate. The sense that she was standing at the edge of something vast and violent, and the only way forward was to jump. Torian pulled something from his jacket, a knife, small enough to hide but sharp enough to matter. The handle was wrapped in leather worn smooth by his palm. She recognized it, their grandfather's blade, the one Torian had carried since he was old enough to understand what it meant to be a Veil. Take this, he said. It won't save you from an alpha, but it'll give you a fighting chance against most things. I can't take that. It's yours. It's yours now, he corrected, because you're going somewhere I can't follow, and I need to know you've got something of home with you, something that'll cut if it needs to. Lysera took it, felt the weight settle into her hand like it had been waiting there. Thank you. And if he hurts you, Torian said, his voice dropping into something that wasn't quite human anymore, if Kael'thorn touches you wrong even once, you send word. I don't care about treaties or alliances or what it costs. I'll come north, and I'll burn his kingdom down around him. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. I know, she said, but you won't need to. I'm harder to kill than I look. He kissed her forehead, stood, and left without looking back. Smart. If he'd looked back, neither of them would have been able to let go. The sun rose red over Dravenhall. Lysera watched it bleed across the horizon and thought about omens, about signs and portents, and all the ways people tried to make meaning out of chaos. The honor guard assembled in the courtyard as the city began to wake. 12 riders and a captain named Velir, who looked at Lysera like she was an infection he couldn't quite cut out. They wore the dark armor of the Veil House, marked with the wolf sigil that she'd never be able to claim. She mounted the horse they'd prepared for her. A gray mare, steady and unremarkable. Not the kind of horse you gave someone who mattered, the kind you gave cargo. Velir rode up beside her as the gates opened. Stay close to the formation, he said. Don't wander. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for the love of whatever you hold sacred, don't do anything that makes my job harder than it already is. Understood. He studied her for a moment, something almost like sympathy crossing his scarred face. Your father's a bastard for doing this. Yes, Lysera agreed. He is. They rode out under skies the color of old bruises, through streets that emptied as they passed. People watched from windows and doorways, their faces carefully blank. Everyone knew what this procession meant. Everyone knew she was being thrown away. No one said goodbye. The city walls fell behind them, and with them went the last illusion of protection. Out here, in the territories between kingdoms, the only law was strength. The only currency was violence. They rode hard through the first day, stopping only to water the horses and eat rations that tasted like ash in Lysera's mouth. The landscape transformed as they pushed north. Cultivated fields gave way to wild grass that grew tall and sharp. Trees twisted into shapes that suggested pain frozen in wood. As the sun fell toward the horizon, Velir called the halt. They made camp in a clearing that felt too exposed, too vulnerable. The men worked in practiced silence, raising tents and building a fire that seemed small against the gathering dark. Lysera sat on a fallen log and watched them move. These were warriors, apex shifters, men who could tear apart ordinary humans without breaking a sweat. But out here, away from the city's walls, she could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they kept their weapons close. "What do you know about him?" she asked Valir when he came to check the perimeter. "About Kael'thorn?" The captain looked at her like she'd asked him to describe his own death. "I know enough to pity you. That's not an answer." Valir poked at the fire with a stick, sent sparks spiraling into the dark. "I was at the Thornridge Summit 5 years ago," he said. "Treaty negotiation with the Western Pax. Kael'thorn came personally. Most kings send envoys. Not him. He walked in alone, no guards, no weapons visible. Just him. What happened? Pack leader Morvax thought he could strong-arm better terms, brought 30 of his best warriors, surrounded Kael'thorn in the meeting hall and made demands. Better territory, higher tribute, the kind of thing you ask for when you think you've got the advantage." Lysera waited, knowing the story didn't end there. "Kael'thorn didn't even raise his voice," Valir continued. "Just looked at Morvax and said one word. No. And when Morvax's warriors moved, Kael'thorn killed 14 of them before anyone could blink. Didn't shift, didn't lose control, just moved through them like they were wheat, and he was the harvest." "And Morvax?" Valir's expression went flat, the kind of flat that comes from seeing something that changes how you understand the world. He put his own throat in Kael'thorn's jaws, offered his neck in front of his entire pack. 30 warriors watching their alpha submit like a pup. The king took the submission, but didn't kill him. Said death was mercy, and Morvax hadn't earned it. Left him alive to rule a pack that had watched him break. Lysera's blood ran cold. "That's who they're sending me to." "That's who you're being offered to," Valir corrected. "There's a difference. You're not a person to him. You're a political tool. Best thing you can do is stay quiet, stay out of his way, and pray he forgets you exist." She almost laughed. Almost. Because the absurdity of it was sharp enough to cut. And if I can't, if staying quiet isn't enough? Valir met her eyes, and what she saw there was honest in the way only truly hopeless things can be. "Then you die, girl. But at least you'll die knowing you tried." He walked away, left her sitting by the fire with those words burning worse than the flames. The second day was harder. They rode through country that felt like the world was holding its breath. The trees here grew different, darker, twisted into shapes that suggested violence frozen mid-motion. The sky pressed down heavy and gray, and the wind carried sounds that weren't quite animal and weren't quite human. Lysera's hands ached on the reins. Not from cold, from holding on too tight to the only thing keeping her upright. One of the guards, a young man named Derek, who couldn't have been more than 20, rode up beside her during the afternoon. "Can I ask you something, my lady?" Lysera glanced at him, saw genuine curiosity in his face, not the pity or disgust she'd grown used to. "Go ahead. Are you scared?" Terrified, she answered honestly. "But fear doesn't change what's coming, only how you meet it." Derek nodded like he understood, though she doubted he did. How could he? He had his wolf, had his power, had a future that didn't involve being traded like livestock. "My sister was like you," he said quietly. "Human born to shift her parents. She didn't manifest either." "What happened to her?" "She left. Went south to the human cities. Last I heard, she'd married a merchant and had 2 kids who will never know what it means to feel the wolf inside. Is she happy?" Derek's smile was sad around the edges. "I don't know, but she's alive, and sometimes that's the best you can hope for." Before Lysera could respond, Valir's voice cut across the formation. "Riders, north, formation up." The guard moved with practiced precision, horses wheeling into a defensive pattern. Lysera found herself in the center, surrounded by bodies and steel. Through the trees she saw them. 6 riders on horses that looked like they'd been carved from shadow. They wore armor that seemed to drink light, and they moved with the kind of coordination that came from years of fighting together. The lead rider stopped at the edge of the clearing, raised one hand. "Valir, been a long time." The captain's posture didn't relax. "Drace, you're early. We weren't supposed to meet until the border stones." "Plans changed?" the man called Drace replied. "The king wants his bride delivered directly. No delays?" No stops. She's not his bride, Villiers said carefully. She's a diplomatic offering. There's a difference. Drace smiled, and it was the kind of smile that promised violence if you pushed too hard. Semantics. The girl crosses the border now. Your escort ends here. The hell it does, Villiers growled. We were guaranteed safe passage to the stones. That was the agreement. And I'm altering it. Take it up with your council if you've got complaints. The air crackled with tension. Lysera could see Villiers calculating odds, weighing honor against survival. His men were good, but Drace's riders had the look of soldiers who'd never lost a fight they couldn't walk away from. It's fine, Lysera said, loud enough to carry. I'll go with them. Villiers turned to her, jaw tight. My lady, I can't just... Yes, you can, she interrupted. And you will. Because dying here doesn't serve anyone, and we both know how this ends if you try to stop them. For a moment she thought he might argue, might actually choose honor over sense. But then his shoulders dropped, just slightly, and she knew she'd won. Dismount, Drace ordered. Lysera slid from her horse, hit the ground with legs that felt steadier than they should. She walked forward, past the formation of guards who'd escorted her this far, past the boundary of protection into the space where northern jurisdiction began. Villiers caught her arm as she passed. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I hope you proved them all wrong. She didn't ask who he meant, didn't need to. The northern riders surrounded her immediately, not threatening exactly, but absolute. Drace gestured to a horse, already saddled, already waiting. You ride with us now, he said. We reach the fortress before dark. And if I refuse? Drace's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or pity. Then we tie you to the saddle and you arrive unconscious instead of awake. The outcome doesn't change, only the dignity. She mounted without another word. They rode north at a pace that felt like fleeing. The landscape grew wilder with every mile, the sky pressing down like it was trying to crush them into the earth. Hours passed in silence, broken only by hoofbeats and wind. Lysera's mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask. What was Calethorn really like? What did he want from her? What happened to women who disappointed him? As darkness gathered, she saw it. Calethorn's fortress wasn't a castle. It was a wound in the landscape. Black stone rising from black earth, towers that clawed at the sky like they were trying to escape the ground. No lights burned in the windows, no banners flew from the ramparts. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where mercy went to die. The gates opened without ceremony. They rode through a courtyard paved in stone so smooth it reflected the torches like dark water. Guards lined the walls, silent, watching with eyes that tracked movement like predators evaluating prey. Drace dismounted, gestured for Lysera to follow. The king will see you now. Now? Not tomorrow, not after now. He led her through corridors that seemed to eat sound. Their footsteps should have echoed. They didn't. The silence was absolute, oppressive, the kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat because it was the only thing you could hear. They passed chambers that felt abandoned despite the guards posted at every door, past windows that looked out on courtyards where nothing grew. The fortress felt less like a home and more like a tomb where people happened to still be breathing. They stopped at doors carved from wood so old it had turned to stone. Drace knocked once, waited. Enter. The voice came from inside, low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to make you obey. Drace pushed the doors open and stepped aside. Go, he said quietly, and whatever you do, don't lie to him. He can smell it, can taste it in the air, and he doesn't forgive it. Lysera stepped through. The chamber beyond was vast and empty. A throne room stripped of everything except the throne itself. No tapestries, no artwork, no softness anywhere. Just stone and shadows, and a massive chair carved from something that might have been obsidian or might have been darker. And on that throne sat a man who looked like violence carved into human shape. Calethorn Virex was bigger than she'd expected. Not just tall, but massive, the kind of size that made the space around him feel smaller. Broad shoulders that tested the seams of his shirt, arms corded with muscle that suggested he could break bone without effort. His hair was dark, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Amber. Burning. The kind of eyes that saw through flesh to the fear beneath. He didn't stand, didn't speak, just watched. Lysera forced herself to walk forward, stopped at what felt like a respectful distance. Not too close, not cowering, somewhere between submission and challenge. "I'm Lysera Vale," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded in all that emptiness. "From the house of, I know who you are," Kyle Thorne interrupted. His voice was exactly as she'd imagined, cold, precise, utterly devoid of warmth. "What I don't know is why your father thinks sending me a human girl constitutes an alliance worth acknowledging." The words hit like fists. Lysera felt her jaw clench, felt the anger rising hot behind her ribs. "I'm here because a treaty was signed. Treaties are words on paper," he said. "They mean nothing without power to enforce them. And you, girl, have no power." "Then why accept me?" Kelthorne's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Because your father made an interesting argument. He claimed you were valuable, strategic, worth the resources I'd invest in keeping you alive. Said you had qualities that weren't immediately apparent but would prove useful in time." He leaned forward, and the movement carried such controlled threat that Lysera's instinct screamed at her to run. "So prove it," he said. "Tell me why I shouldn't send you back in pieces as a message about wasting my time." Lysera's mind raced. This wasn't negotiation. This was a test. The kind where wrong answers ended in violence and right answers bought you time, but not safety. She thought about lying, about inventing skills she didn't have or claiming value she couldn't prove. But Drace's warning echoed in her head. He can smell lies. So she told the truth. "I don't have the power you value," she said carefully. "I can't shift, can't dominate, can't command through force. By every measure that matters in your world, I'm worthless. Then you're wasting my time. But I can see things others can't." Kelthorne went very still. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. "Explain." Lysera took a breath. Bet everything on honesty because lies would kill her faster. "You're in pain," she said. "Right now. Constant. I can see it in how you hold yourself. The way your left hand tenses when you think no one's watching. The way your breathing shifts when you turn your head too fast. Something's eating you from the inside, and no one in this fortress knows because you won't let them see it." The temperature in the room dropped. Kelthorne rose from his throne, and standing, he was even more terrifying. 7 feet of controlled violence, every muscle coiled like a spring wound too tight. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, grabbed her jaw with one hand, forced her head up until she was staring into eyes that had stopped being entirely human. "Who told you that?" "No one." His grip tightened, not enough to hurt, just enough to promise he could. "Who told you?" Lysera met his gaze, refused to flinch even though every instinct screamed at her to submit, to look away, to give this predator what he wanted. "Nobody told me," she said. "I just see it. I've always been able to see it. Pain, fear, the things people hide because showing weakness gets them killed." Kelthorne's thumb brushed her cheekbone. The touch was almost gentle. Almost. "And what exactly do you see when you look at me?" Lysera told the truth because anything else felt like suicide. "I see a king who's holding himself together through sheer force of will. I see power that's eating you alive from the inside out. I see a man who's terrified that if he shows weakness for even a second, his entire empire will tear itself apart. And I see something else, something darker. Like there's a war happening inside you that nobody else can see, and you're losing." Kelthorne released her, stepped back. His expression was unreadable, but his breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. "You should be terrified right now," he said. "I am," Lysera admitted, "but that doesn't change what I see." He studied her for a long moment. Then he turned, walked back to his throne with movements that were just slightly off, like each step cost him something he couldn't afford to spend. He sat like a man who'd made a decision he couldn't unmake. "You'll stay," he said. "Not as a bride, not as an alliance, as an experiment." An experiment in what? Whether you're clever or just suicidal. Whether what you claim to see is real, or if you're gambling that I'm desperate enough to believe a pretty lie. Lysera wanted to ask what happened if she failed the experiment, wanted to know the stakes, but she was afraid she already knew. Kelthorne gestured to the doors. They opened without him touching them, like the fortress itself obeyed his will. "Drace will show you to your chambers. You'll have 3 days to prove you're worth keeping alive." After that, I'll decide whether to send you home or add you to the foundation." The foundation? He smiled, and it was the most inhuman expression Lysera had ever seen on a face that still claimed to be a man's. "This fortress is built on the bones of people who disappointed me," he said. "Stone and mortar and crushed bone. Makes for remarkably strong walls. Don't become part of the architecture." Drace appeared at her elbow, guided her toward the exit with a hand that was firm but not cruel. Lysera didn't resist. Couldn't. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. But as the doors began to close behind her, she heard Calethorn speak one last time. "And girl?" She turned. "If you're lying about what you can see," his voice was soft, almost kind, "I'll make sure you spend your last hours wishing you'd never learned how to speak. I'll make it slow. I'll make it precise. And I'll make sure everyone in this fortress hears what happens to people who try to deceive me." The doors slammed shut with a finality that felt like a tomb being sealed. Lysera followed Drace through corridors that blurred together into a nightmare of stone and shadow. Her hands were shaking, her breath coming in short gasps that she couldn't quite control. "You did better than most," Drace said quietly as they walked. "Most what?" "Most people who stand in front of the king for the first time. Half of them piss themselves. The other half faint. You did neither. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No. Just wanted you to know you're tougher than you look." He stopped at a door, pushed it open to reveal chambers that were sparse but clean. A bed, a window, a basin for washing. Nothing decorative, nothing soft. "Food will be brought at sunset," he said. "Don't leave these rooms without an escort. Don't try to explore. And don't, under any circumstances, go near the king's quarters after dark. That's when the curse is strongest." Lysera's head snapped up. "What curse?" Drace's expression shuttered closed. "You've got 3 days," he said. "Use them wisely." He left. The door closed, and Lysera was alone in a stone room in a fortress that felt like the edge of the world, with 3 days to prove she was worth keeping alive to a king who might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever encountered. She walked to the window, looked out at landscape that stretched dark and empty toward a horizon she couldn't see. Her hand found the knife Torian had given her. The weight of it against her hip was the only familiar thing in this entire nightmare. She thought about her father, about the council, about every person who'd looked at her and seen weakness instead of potential. They'd sent her here to die with dignity. But Lysera Vale had never been particularly good at doing what she was told. And if she only had 3 days to prove her value, she was going to make damn sure they counted. The real question was how. How did you prove yourself valuable to a king who measured worth in violence? How did you convince a man drowning in his own power that you could be his anchor instead of his victim? She didn't have answers yet, but she had 3 days to find them, and failure, she knew with bone-deep certainty, would be permanent. The first night in Calethorn's fortress, Lysera didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed that felt more like a slab than anything meant for rest, and listened to the silence press against the walls. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Outside her window, the northern landscape stretched black and endless under a sky with no moon, no stars, just darkness so complete it felt like falling. She kept thinking about the king's eyes, the way they'd burned into her when he'd grabbed her jaw, the way his hand had been massive enough to crush her skull, but controlled enough to hold her without bruising. That control was the terrifying part. Anyone could be violent. Violence was easy. But violence that precise, that measured, that spoke to something far more dangerous than rage. It spoke to discipline, to power so absolute it didn't need to prove itself. And underneath it, she'd seen the fracture, the pain he was hiding, the way his left hand had trembled for just a fraction of a second before he'd clenched it into a fist, the slight hitch in his breathing when he'd turned his head. These weren't weaknesses in the traditional sense. They were cracks in armor that should have been impenetrable. Something was eating him alive from the inside, and somehow, impossibly, she'd seen it when no one else could. The question now was what to do with that information, whether to use it or bury it, whether seeing what others couldn't was a gift or just a different kind of death sentence. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being the only person who notices the world is ending. You can see the cracks forming in the foundation, can feel the ground shifting beneath everyone's feet, but when you try to warn them, they look at you like you're the problem, like noticing the truth makes you dangerous instead of useful. Lysera had lived with that loneliness her entire life. In Dravenhall, she'd seen the council members who smiled while plotting betrayals, had watched her father's advisors offer loyalty with their mouths while their eyes calculated angles of attack, had felt the fear radiating off servants who knew they were one mistake away from being discarded. But no one wanted to hear it, because acknowledging that kind of truth meant acknowledging that the world wasn't as stable as everyone pretended, that power was more fragile than it looked, that the people in charge were just as scared as everyone else. They were just better at hiding it. So she'd learned to stay quiet, to see without speaking, to carry the weight of other people's secrets like stones in her pockets. Until tonight, when she'd opened her mouth and bet everything on honesty. Food came at sunset like Drace had promised. A servant girl, couldn't have been more than 14, slid a tray through the door and disappeared before Lysera could even say thank you. The girl's hands had been shaking. Her eyes had been fixed on the floor. Terrified. Of what? Of this place? Of the king? Of being seen talking to the human girl who didn't belong? Probably all of it. Lysera picked at the food. Meat that had been cooked until it was leather. Bread that tasted like ash. Water that was clean but somehow still felt wrong going down her throat. She forced herself to eat anyway. Survival started with the basics. Food, water, sleep if she could manage it. She was halfway through the meal when she heard it. A sound. Distant but distinct. Coming from somewhere deeper in the fortress. Not quite human, not quite animal. Something in between. A howl that carried pain like a physical thing. Lysera's hands froze on the bread. Her heart kicked against her ribs. The sound came again. Longer this time. Raw. The kind of sound that came from something being torn apart from the inside. She stood, moved to the door, pressed her ear against the wood. The howling continued, rose and fell like waves, and underneath it she could hear something else. Words. Too distorted to make out, but definitely words. Someone was speaking through the pain, or trying to. "Don't go near the king's quarters after dark," Drace had said. "That's when the curse is strongest." Lysera's hand found the door handle before she could talk herself out of it. The corridor outside her chambers was empty, torches burned in iron brackets, casting shadows that moved like living things. The howling was clearer out here, coming from the eastern wing, down a hallway that looked like it led toward the heart of the fortress. She knew she should go back inside. Knew that investigating was exactly the kind of thing that got curious people killed in places like this. But understanding had always been stronger than fear for her. She needed to see. Needed to know if what she'd sensed in Calethorn was real or if she'd just been gambling with her own desperation. She moved down the corridor. Bare feet silent on stone floors. The knife Torian had given her pressed against her thigh through the fabric of her dress. Not that it would do any good against what she was walking toward, but the weight of it was comforting anyway. The howling grew louder, closer. She turned a corner and nearly ran into a guard. He was massive, built like violence and covered in scars that told stories about surviving things that should have killed him. His hand went to his sword before he recognized she wasn't a threat. "What the hell are you doing out here?" His voice was rough, accent from somewhere far north where the cold bit deeper. "I heard something, wanted to make sure everything was okay." The guard's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Nothing in this fortress is okay, girl. Get back to your chambers before—" The howling cut him off. Louder now, close enough that Lysera could feel it vibrating in her chest. The guard's expression shifted. Fear flickered across his face before he could hide it. "You need to leave. Now." "What's happening to him?" The guard grabbed her arm. Not gently, started pulling her back toward her chambers. "That's not your concern. The king's business is his own. He's dying." The words came out before Lysera could stop them. But once they were loose, she couldn't take them back. The guard stopped, turned to look at her with eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. "What did you say?" "Whatever's happening to him," Lysera pressed, "it's killing him." Slowly. "I can see it. And if no one does something, he won't last the year." The guard's grip loosened slightly. "You can see it? I can feel it. Like a weight in the air. Like something's being crushed." Another howl ripped through the fortress. This one felt different. Not just pain, rage. The kind that came from being trapped in your own body with no way out. "He doesn't shift anymore," the guard said quietly. "Hasn't in 3 years. Used to run the northern territories every full moon. Used to be the first one out the gates when the hunt was called. Now he stays locked in his chambers, and we listen to him tear himself apart. Why? Because shifting makes it worse. Whatever the curse is, it feeds on his wolf. The more he lets it out, the more it consumes him. So he holds it in, keeps it caged, and it's destroying him piece by piece. Lysera's mind raced. A shifter who couldn't shift was like a river that couldn't flow. The pressure built until something broke. "Let me see him." The guard shook his head. "Not possible. When he's like this, no one gets close. Last person who tried lost an arm. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what needs to happen." She pulled free of his grip, started walking toward the source of the howling. The guard caught up in 2 strides. "This is suicide." "Maybe. But doing nothing is definitely death. For him and probably for everyone in this fortress once he finally loses control completely." They reached a set of doors that looked like they'd been reinforced. Heavy iron bars across the wood, locks that would have stopped a battering ram. The howling was coming from inside. The guard pulled a key from his belt. Hesitated. "If you go in there and he kills you, I'm the one who'll answer for it." "Then don't let him kill me." "How exactly am I supposed to stop him?" Lysera looked at the doors, at the barrier between her and whatever was happening on the other side. "You're not," she said, "but I might be able to." The guard studied her face, searching for something. Sanity, maybe? Or just enough crazy to make this work. Whatever he saw must have been convincing, because he turned the key. The locks disengaged with sounds like breaking bones. "Stay behind me," he ordered, "and if I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue. Don't hesitate. Just move. Understood?" He pushed the doors open. The chamber beyond was destroyed, furniture shattered, walls gouged with claw marks deep enough to show the stone beneath the plaster. And in the center of the wreckage stood Calethorn, except it wasn't entirely Calethorn anymore. His body was caught between forms, half human, half something else. His spine bent at angles that should have been impossible. His hands had elongated into claws that dripped blood onto the floor. His eyes burned with light that wasn't entirely sane. He turned when the doors opened, focused on them with the attention of something that had forgotten how to be human and was remembering how to be predator. The guard's hand went to his sword. "Don't," Lysera said quietly. "That'll just make it worse. What do you suggest? I talked to him. He's not capable of conversation right now." "Then I guess we're about to find out if I'm right about what I can do." She stepped past the guard, walked into the chamber with hands visible and empty. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to get out while she still could. She ignored them. Calethorn tracked her movement. His breathing was ragged. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from teeth that were too sharp to be human. "Can you hear me?" Lysera kept her voice level. Calm. The way you'd talk to a spooked horse or a wounded animal. No response. Just that burning stare. "I know it hurts," she continued. "I know you feel like you're being torn apart, but I need you to listen to me, just for a minute." Calethorn's claws flexed, gouged new marks in the stone floor. The guard shifted behind her, ready to move if this went wrong. "What you're feeling," Lysera said, taking another step closer. "It's the curse feeding on your power. Every time you try to control it, it gets stronger. Every time you hold the wolf back, the pressure builds. You're fighting yourself and wondering why you can't win." Calethorn's head tilted, a gesture that was almost curious. "But you're not supposed to win," she said. "That's not how this works. The curse doesn't want you dead. It wants you contained. Wants you burning yourself out trying to maintain control while it drains you dry." She was close enough now to see the sweat soaking through his shirt, to smell the copper tang of blood in the air. "So stop fighting it." Calethorn's eyes narrowed. "Not the curse," Lysera clarified. "Stop fighting yourself. The wolf isn't your enemy. The cage you've built around it is." She reached out, slowly, giving him every chance to pull away or strike or tear her apart. Her hand touched his chest. The reaction was immediate. Calethorn flinched like she'd burned him. But he didn't pull away, didn't attack. Because the moment her palm made contact with his skin, something shifted. Lysera felt it. The pain he'd been carrying, the weight of it. Not just physical, but something deeper. Something that went down to the core of what he was. It was like touching exposed nerves, like pressing her hand into fire. Every instinct screamed at her to let go. She held on, and slowly, carefully, She did what she'd done her entire life without understanding it. She absorbed some of the weight, not all of it. She wasn't strong enough for that, but enough to take the edge off, enough to give him room to breathe. Calethorn's breathing slowed. The light in his eyes dimmed from burning to merely intense. His body began to shift back toward human, bones realigning with sounds that made Lysera's stomach turn. The transformation reversed, slow, painful, but deliberate now instead of chaotic. When it was done, Calethorn stood in front of her fully human again, covered in blood and sweat and looking like he'd been to war and barely survived, but alive, conscious, aware. His hand came up, wrapped around her wrist where it still rested against his chest. "What did you do?" His voice was raw, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion and something that might have been wonder. "I don't know," Lysera admitted. "I've never been able to explain it. I just feel what others feel. And sometimes, if I'm close enough, I can take some of it, carry it for them. That's not possible." And yet, she pulled her hand back, felt the absence of his pain like losing a limb. Her own body ached now. Bones felt bruised, head pounded with pressure that hadn't been there before. But she stayed upright, stayed steady. Calethorn studied her with eyes that were calculating even in exhaustion. "You just saved my life. I just bought you time," Lysera corrected. "Whatever this curse is, it's still there, still eating at you. I can help manage the symptoms, but I can't cure the disease. And yet you tried anyway. Why?" "Because 3 days isn't enough time to prove I'm valuable if you're dead by morning." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Practical. I'm a lot of things. Stupid isn't one of them." The guard cleared his throat from the doorway, a reminder that they had an audience. Calethorn's expression shuttered closed. The vulnerability that had been there moments ago vanished behind walls that looked impenetrable. "Get out," he ordered. "Both of you. But now." The word carried enough command that Lysera's feet moved before her brain caught up. The guard's hand found her elbow, guided her toward the exit. As they reached the doors, Calethorn spoke again. "Tomorrow. Dawn. You'll meet me in the eastern courtyard. We're going to test exactly how much of my pain you can carry." "Is that a request or an order?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "Do you really want me to answer that?" She didn't. The guard escorted her back to her chambers in silence. Didn't speak until they reached her door. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, "or the dumbest. Probably both." He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. "My name's Corvin, and for what it's worth, I hope you survive what you just started." "So do I." He left. Lysera went back inside, closed the door and leaned against it until her legs stopped shaking. Her body hurt everywhere. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the deep ache of muscles that had been worked past their limit. The headache pulsed behind her eyes like something trying to crack her skull open from the inside. She'd taken Calethorn's pain. Not all of it. Maybe not even a fraction, but enough that her body was screaming about it now. And tomorrow she'd have to do it again. Because she'd proven she could do something no one else in this fortress could. She'd touched the most dangerous man in the north while he was losing his mind and somehow walked away intact. That made her valuable. But it also made her necessary. And in a place like this, necessary was just another word for trapped. She made it to the bed before the exhaustion hit. Collapsed onto the mattress still fully dressed. Her last thought before unconsciousness took her was that she'd survived one night. 2 more days to prove she was worth keeping alive. And then what? She didn't have an answer to that yet. Dawn came gray and cold. Lysera woke to her body screaming protest at every movement. The headache had faded to a dull throb, but the muscle aches had gotten worse. She felt like she'd been beaten with clubs. This was the cost, then. Taking someone else's pain didn't make it disappear. It just redistributed the weight. The servant girl brought food and water, wouldn't meet Lysera's eyes, set the tray down and fled like the room was on fire. Word had spread then, about what happened last night. Lysera forced herself to eat, forced herself to wash and dress in clothes that felt too heavy for her exhausted body. By the time she made it to the eastern courtyard, the sun had barely cleared the horizon. Calethorn was already there. He stood in the center of the courtyard with his back to her. No guards, no witnesses, just him and the morning cold. "You're late," he said without turning around. "You didn't give me a time. Dawn means the moment the sun breaks the horizon. Anything after that is late. Lysera walked to stand beside him, looked at his face in the gray light, and saw the exhaustion etched into every line. He'd probably slept as poorly as she had. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I was turned inside out and scraped raw." "That's accurate." His eyes cut to her, sharp despite the fatigue. "And you?" "Like I got hit by a cart." Also accurate. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. "What happens now?" Lysera asked finally. "Now we see if last night was luck, or if you can actually do what you claim. And if I can't, then you were right. 3 days isn't enough time, and neither of us makes it to the end of the week." He gestured to the center of the courtyard, a space that had been cleared, stone floor polished smooth by years of use. "Shift," Lysera said. "Let me see what happens when you don't hold back. If I shift, I might not be able to control it. That's why we're doing this here. Open space. No one around. If it goes wrong, at least the damage is contained. If it goes wrong, you die. You understand that?" "I understand that doing nothing guarantees we both die. So we might as well try." Kelthorne's jaw clenched. She could see him calculating risks, weighing outcomes, trying to find an angle that didn't end in blood. But there wasn't one, and they both knew it. "Stay back," he ordered. "Give me room." Lysera moved to the edge of the courtyard, watched as Kelthorne stripped off his shirt, tossed it aside. The scars covering his torso told stories about violence survived, but it was the newer marks that caught her attention. Dark lines spreading from his chest like cracks in glass. They pulsed with each heartbeat. "That's the curse," he said, following her gaze. "Started 3 years ago. Small at first. Now it's consuming me." "What caused it?" "A question for another time. If we both survive this." He closed his eyes, took a breath that sounded like a man preparing to jump off a cliff, and then he shifted. It wasn't like the transformations Lysera had seen in Dravenhall. Those had been smooth, beautiful even. The wolf emerging like it had been waiting just beneath the skin. This was violent. Kelthorne's body contorted, bones breaking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding. His spine arched until it looked like it might snap. And through it all, he made sounds that weren't human and weren't animal, just pure agony given voice. The dark lines across his chest blazed, spread like fire, and with them came something else. Power, raw and absolute. The kind that made the air heavy and hard to breathe. Lysera felt it pressing against her, felt the weight of it trying to drive her to her knees. But she'd grown up surrounded by alphas, had learned young that submission was a choice, not an inevitability. She stayed standing, the transformation completed. Where Kelthorne had stood, there was now a wolf the size of a small horse. Black fur, eyes that burned amber. Every line of his body spoke to violence barely contained, and the curse had grown with him. The dark lines now covered half his body, pulsing, feeding. Lysera walked forward, slow, hands visible. The wolf's attention snapped to her, lips pulled back to show teeth designed to tear flesh from bone. "I need you to trust me," she said quietly. "Just for a minute." "Can you do that?" The wolf growled. Low, a sound that vibrated in her chest. "I know it hurts. I know the curse is tearing you apart, but I need to get close. Need to touch you while you're like this. Otherwise I can't help." She was 10 feet away now, close enough that one leap would close the distance. The wolf's muscles coiled. Lysera stopped, waited. And slowly, deliberately, she knelt, made herself smaller, less threatening. It was a gamble. In shifter culture, kneeling could be submission or it could be strategy. Right now, she was betting on the latter. The wolf's growl faded, replaced by something that sounded almost curious. Lysera extended her hand, palm up. An offering. "Let me help," she said. The wolf stared at her hand like it was a trap, like this was some elaborate trick designed to get close enough to hurt him. But then, slowly, he moved forward. Each step was controlled, careful, like he was fighting every instinct that told him to attack. He stopped just outside her reach, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. Smell the copper tang of blood where the transformation had torn his skin. Lysera didn't move, didn't rush, just kept her hand extended and waited for him to make the choice. The wolf leaned forward, pressed his massive head against her palm. The contact hit her like lightning. The pain was worse in this form, exponentially worse. The curse had more surface area to work with, more power to feed on. It was eating him alive, and he was using every ounce of control he had to keep from losing himself completely. Lysera gasped, nearly pulled away. But she'd promised to help, and she'd never broken a promise she could keep. She pressed both hands against the wolf's head, closed her eyes, and opened herself to the full weight of what he was carrying. It was like drowning, like being pulled under by a current too strong to fight. The pain wasn't just physical, it was existential, the kind that made you question whether survival was worth the cost. But underneath the pain, she felt something else. Fear. Calethorn was terrified, not of dying, of losing control, of becoming the monster everyone already thought he was, of proving them right. That fear was the anchor, the thing the curse had latched onto and was using to tear him apart, because fear fed on itself, grew stronger the more you tried to suppress it. So Lysera did the only thing she could think of. She stopped trying to fight it, stopped trying to absorb it, or manage it, or make it smaller. Instead, she just held it, acknowledged it, gave it space to exist without judgment, and slowly, carefully, the pressure began to ease. Not gone, still there, but no longer crushing. The wolf's breathing slowed, the tension in his muscles loosened, the dark lines on his body faded from black to gray. Lysera opened her eyes to find the wolf staring at her with expression that was entirely too human. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're still in control. The curse doesn't own you." The wolf made a sound that might have been agreement, and then, gradually, he shifted back. The transformation reversed, smoother this time, less violent. Within minutes, Calethorn knelt in front of her in human form. He was shaking, covered in blood and sweat, but his eyes were clear, aware. "How?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I didn't take the pain away," Lysera said. "I just made room for it. Sometimes the thing destroying us isn't the weight itself. It's the belief that we have to carry it alone." Calethorn stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't know existed. 3 years, he said. 3 years of this getting worse every time I shift, and you just walked into my fortress and stopped it in 2 days. I didn't stop it. I just gave you room to breathe. That's more than anyone else has managed. He stood, offered her his hand. Lysera took it, let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt like water, her head spun, but she stayed upright through sheer force of will. "You've proven your value," Calethorn said. "You'll stay. Not as a bride, not as an experiment, as something I don't have a name for yet. What happens now? Now we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to matter." There was something in his voice that made Lysera's stomach drop. "What aren't you telling me?" Calethorn's expression went hard. "The court convenes tomorrow. Every alpha in the Northern Territories will be here. And when they see that you've done something no one else could, they're going to want you, either as an asset or as a threat to eliminate. Which am I? Both. And that makes you the most dangerous person in this fortress." He started walking toward the main keep. Lysera followed. "So what do I do?" "You survive," Calethorn said. "Whatever it takes." Because the moment the court realizes what you can do, the rules change. And in this kingdom, changing the rules gets people killed. They reached the doors. Calethorn stopped, turned to face her. "One more thing, yes?" His hand came up, gripped her chin the way it had that first night. But this time there was no threat in the touch, just intensity. "What you did this morning saved my life. That creates a debt. And debts in shifter culture are blood-binding, which means from this moment forward, you're under my protection. Anyone who touches you answers to me. Is that a reward or a threat? Depends on who you ask." He released her, walked through the doors without looking back. Lysera stood in the courtyard and tried to process what had just happened. She'd come to this fortress expecting to die with dignity, to be discarded like the broken thing everyone believed her to be. Instead, she'd become necessary to the most powerful alpha in the North. And tomorrow, she'd have to prove that value in front of a court that would tear her apart the moment they sensed weakness. The smart thing would be to run, to disappear into the territories and hope no one came looking. But Lysera had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing. And some part of her, the part that had always seen what others couldn't, knew that running wasn't an option anymore. Because the moment she'd touched Calethorn's pain and survived it, She'd crossed a line there was no stepping back from. She was in this now, all the way to whatever end was waiting. The only question left was whether that end would be survival or something far worse. The court convened at noon in a hall that looked like it had been carved from the bones of something ancient and violent. Lysera stood at the edge of the chamber and tried to remember how to breathe like she wasn't about to be torn apart. 40 alphas filled the space. 40 apex predators who'd built their power on violence and maintained it through fear. They sat in tiered seats that curved around the central floor like an arena, and every single pair of eyes tracked her movement with the precision of things calculating how best to kill. She'd faced her father's counsel. That had been theater designed to humiliate. This was different. This was assessment. Cold. Clinical. The kind that ended in decisions you didn't walk away from. Kelthorne sat on a throne at the far end of the hall. He looked every inch the king this morning. No sign of the man who'd been tearing himself apart 12 hours ago. No hint of vulnerability. Just power carved into human shape and wrapped in authority that felt absolute. His eyes found hers across the distance, held for a moment, then moved on like she was just another piece on a board he was learning to play. The message was clear. Whatever protection he'd offered in private didn't extend here. In this room, she was on her own. Lord Vadrix rose from his seat in the second tier. He was older than most of the alphas present, with silver threading through dark hair and scars that spoke to decades of survival. But it was his eyes that made Lysera's skin crawl. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen empires rise and fall and had learned to profit from both. "We're here to discuss the Southern Treaty," Vadrix began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "King Kelthorne has accepted a bride from the Vale bloodline, a gesture of alliance between our territories and theirs." He paused. Let the word bride hang in the air like bait. However, there are concerns about the legitimacy of this arrangement. The girl is human, powerless, a stain on a bloodline that should command respect. Some would say this insults us, that accepting such an offering shows weakness. The murmur that rippled through the assembled alphas was immediate. Agreement, challenge, the kind of restless energy that preceded violence. Kelthorne didn't move, didn't speak, just watched with eyes that gave nothing away. Vadrix continued. "I propose we examine the girl, determine if she has any value beyond political theater, and if she doesn't, we send her back to Dravenhall in pieces as a message about what happens when you waste our time." The murmur grew louder, more aggressive. Lysera's hands clenched at her sides. She'd known this was coming, Kelthorne had warned her, but knowing and experiencing were different things. "Bring her forward," Vadrix ordered. 2 guards appeared at Lysera's elbows. Not touching, not yet. Just close enough to make the threat clear. She walked to the center of the floor because refusing would only make it worse, her bare feet against stone that was cold enough to burn. 40 pairs of eyes tracking every step. When she reached the center, Vadrix descended from his seat, circled her like she was livestock being evaluated for purchase. "Tell us, girl, what exactly makes you worthy of standing in this hall?" Lysera kept her voice steady. "I can see what others can't, feel what they hide. Pain, fear, the fractures beneath power." "Parlor tricks," Vadrix dismissed. "Every empath claims the same. Show us something real or stop wasting our time. This was the test then. Prove her value or die trying." Lysera looked up at the assembled alphas, scanned their faces, and for the first time since arriving in the north, she stopped trying to hide what she could do. She opened herself to the room. The weight hit her immediately. 40 sources of pain and fear and rage all bleeding into the air like open wounds. It was overwhelming, suffocating, the kind of pressure that made her vision swim and her knees want to buckle. But she'd survived Kelthorne's curse, survived touching pain that should have killed her. This was just more of the same. "You," she said, pointing to an alpha in the 3rd tier. Scarred face, cold eyes. "You're dying, something in your chest eating you from the inside. You hide it well, but I can feel it. 3 months, maybe 4, that's all you have left." The alpha's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confirmation. "And you," Lysera turned to a woman in the front row. "You lost a child last winter. Still dream about her every night. The grief is so heavy you can barely stand under it, but you keep moving because stopping would mean admitting she's really gone." The woman's jaw clenched, Her hands gripped the armrests of her seat hard enough that the wood creaked. Lysera continued. Moved through the assembled court like she was reading a map only she could see. Called out secrets, named fears, stripped away the carefully constructed masks these alphas wore, and exposed the raw humanity underneath. By the time she finished, the hall was silent, not the restful kind, the kind that comes before something breaks. Vadrix stared at her with expression that had shifted from dismissive to calculating. Interesting, he said, but ultimately useless. Seeing weakness doesn't make you strong. It just makes you aware of how fragile everything is. He turned to address Calethorn. This girl is a liability. She sees too much, knows too much, and knowledge like that in the hands of someone with no power is dangerous. I move that we eliminate the threat before it becomes a problem. Several alphas nodded agreement. Lysera's heart kicked against her ribs. This was it. The moment where being valuable became being too valuable to leave alive. Calethorn finally spoke. His voice cut through the murmur like a blade through silk. Lord Vadrix makes an interesting point. Knowledge without power is dangerous. But he's wrong about one thing. What's that, my king? She does have power, just not the kind you recognize. Calethorn rose from his throne, descended the steps with movements that were controlled but carried the promise of violence. He reached the center of the floor, stood beside Lysera, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. 2 days ago, he said, I was hours from losing control completely. The curse was consuming me. My wolf was tearing me apart from the inside, and no one in this fortress could stop it. Not the healers, not the advisors, no one. He turned to face the assembled court. This girl walked into my chambers while I was mid-transformation and stopped the curse cold. Didn't cure it, but gave me enough relief that I could shift back to human without destroying everything in reach. Something none of you could do despite decades of experience and power. The silence deepened, became absolute. So when Lord Vadrix says she's useless, Calethorn continued, he's either lying or he's stupid, and I don't employ stupid people. Vadrix's expression hardened. My king, with respect, one moment of relief doesn't prove long-term value. It proves she got lucky. Then let's test it, Calethorn said. Right here, right now. He turned to Lysera. His eyes carried a question she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. Can you do it again? In front of witnesses? Lysera swallowed. Her body still ached from this morning. Her head pounded with the weight of 40 different sources of pain pressing against her awareness. Doing this again so soon was dangerous, possibly fatal, but saying no was definitely fatal. Yes, she said. Calethorn nodded once, stepped back to give her room, and then he shifted. It was faster this time, more controlled. But the curse came with him, the dark lines blazing across his body as the transformation completed. The massive black wolf stood in the center of the hall with eyes that burned amber and power that made the air itself feel heavy. Several alphas shifted in their seats, hands moving toward weapons. Because this was their king losing control in front of them, an instinct said to prepare for violence. But Calethorn wasn't losing control. Not yet. He was holding steady, waiting. Lysera approached slowly. Every eye in the hall tracked her movement. She could feel their attention like weight pressing down on her shoulders. She reached the wolf, extended her hand, and pressed her palm against his massive head. The pain hit harder than it had this morning, because the curse had fed on the stress of appearing before the court, had grown stronger on Calethorn's need to maintain dominance while his body tried to tear itself apart. Lysera gasped, nearly pulled away. But 40 alphas were watching, 40 predators looking for any sign of weakness to exploit. So she held on, opened herself to the full weight of what Calethorn was carrying, let it pour into her like water into a vessel already too full. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the wolf's shoulder, felt his muscles tense under her hand. The dark lines on his body pulsed, spread. For a moment, she thought this was it. She'd pushed too hard and they were both going to pay the price. But then, slowly, the lines began to recede. The pressure eased. Not gone. Still there. But manageable. The wolf's breathing slowed. The tension in his frame loosened. And gradually, Calethorn shifted back to human. When the transformation completed, he knelt on the stone floor, breathing hard but steady. The dark lines had faded to gray. Still visible, but no longer consuming. Lysera swayed on her feet. Her vision blurred at the edges. Blood dripped from her nose, hot and copper-tasting. But she stayed upright. Kelthorn stood, looked at the assembled court with expression that dared anyone to question what they'd just witnessed. "Still think she's useless?" he asked Vadrix. The old alpha's face was carefully blank. "I think she's demonstrated a unique capability. Whether that makes her valuable or dangerous remains to be seen." "It makes her mine," Kelthorn said flatly. "Under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Are we clear?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Not enthusiastic, but acknowledgement. Vadrix bowed his head, a gesture of submission that looked more like strategy than surrender. "Of course, my king. As you command." The court was dismissed with a wave of Kelthorn's hand. The alphas filed out in groups, their conversations low and urgent. Plotting. Always plotting. Lysera stood in the center of the floor and tried to convince her legs to keep holding her weight. Blood still dripped from her nose. Her head felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. Kelthorn's hand found her elbow, steadied her. "Can you walk?" "I can do whatever I need to do." "That's not what I asked." "Yes," she admitted. "Barely, but yes." He guided her toward the side exit, away from the main corridors where the departing alphas might see her weakness. They made it to a small chamber before Lysera's legs finally gave out. She collapsed against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on cold stone. Kelthorn knelt in front of her, produced a cloth from somewhere, and wiped the blood from her face with surprising gentleness. "You shouldn't have pushed that hard," he said. "You could have killed yourself. Would have been worse to fail in front of them." "Death is usually worse than failure. Not in your court." He almost smiled. "Almost. You're right about that." Lysera closed her eyes, tried to breathe through the pain radiating from every nerve ending. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you rest, and tomorrow we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to matter." "Vadrix won't let this go. He saw what I can do. That makes me either an asset he wants to control or a threat he needs to eliminate." Kelthorn's expression went cold. Hard. The king instead of the man. "Let him try. He'll learn the same lesson everyone else who's challenged me has learned, which is that I don't lose." But there was something in his voice that made Lysera's stomach drop, a note of uncertainty, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "You're worried," she said. "I'm cautious. There's a difference." "What aren't you telling me?" Kelthorn stood, looked down at her with eyes that carried weight she couldn't quite read. "Vadrix has been on this council longer than I've been alive. He's survived 6 kings and outlasted every challenge to his position. Men like that don't survive by accident. They survive by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around them. So what does that mean for me?" "It means you need to be careful, because he won't come at you directly. He'll find another way, and you won't see it coming until it's too late." The next 3 days passed in a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Lysera stayed in her chambers mostly, ventured out only with guards Kelthorn assigned personally, ate food that had been tested by someone else first, drank water from sealed containers. Every precaution that should have made her feel safe just reminded her how much danger she was in. The court dispersed back to their territories. The fortress settled into something that felt like routine, but had too much tension underneath to be truly calm. Kelthorn sent for her twice, once to test if she could manage his curse again, once just to talk, though the conversation felt more like interrogation. Probing questions about what she'd seen in the assembled alphas, who seemed most dangerous, who might be plotting. She answered honestly because lying to him felt suicidal. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, some pressure accumulating behind walls she couldn't see. On the 4th night, it broke. Lysera woke to hands around her throat, strong, precise, cutting off air before she could scream. Her eyes flew open to darkness. A figure loomed over her, features hidden by shadows, and a mask that covered everything except cold eyes. She clawed at the hands, kicked, fought with everything she had. But human strength against shifter strength was like fighting the tide. Futile and exhausting. Her vision started to gray at the edges. Her lungs burned. The knife Torian had given her was under her pillow, but she couldn't reach it with hands pinned to her sides. This was it. This was how it ended. Strangled in the dark by an assassin who'd bypassed every protection Kelthorn had put in place. The figure leaned closer, whispered against her ear with breath that smelled like ash. You should have stayed in Dravenhall, girl. Should have accepted your fate with dignity. Now you die afraid and alone, and no one will even know why. The hands tightened. Lysera's struggles grew weaker. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and then the door exploded inward. Calethorn stood in the doorway with eyes that had stopped being human. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second, saw Lysera pinned to the bed, saw the assassin, and moved. He crossed the room faster than should have been possible, grabbed the assassin by the throat, and hurled him across the chamber. The figure hit the wall hard enough to crack stone, crumpled to the floor. Calethorn was on him before he could recover, claws extended, teeth elongated, the shift happening in pieces as rage overwhelmed control. He tore the mask off. The face underneath made Lysera's blood run cold. Corvin, the guard who'd helped her that first night, who'd warned her about the curse, who'd seemed almost kind. Why? Calethorn's voice was barely recognizable, more growl than speech. Corvin spat blood. His smile was broken but defiant. Because she's changing you, making you weak, and weak kings don't survive. Who sent you? No one sends me. I act for the good of the realm. Calethorn's claws pressed against Corvin's throat. Drew blood. The guard's smile never wavered. Do it, he said. Kill me. Prove you've already lost control, that she's already destroyed the king we needed. For a moment, Lysera thought Calethorn would actually do it. Thought he'd tear Corvin's throat out right there and prove the assassin's point. But then he pulled back, stood. The claws retracted, the teeth shortened. The man reasserted control over the wolf through visible effort. Take him to the cells, Calethorn ordered the guards who'd appeared in the doorway. I want to know everything, who he's working with, who put this idea in his head. Everything. The guards dragged Corvin away. He went without resistance, still smiling like he'd already won something Calethorn hadn't realized was at stake. When they were alone, Calethorn turned to Lysera. She was still on the bed, still trying to remember how to breathe without her throat closing. Are you hurt? She touched her neck, felt the bruises already forming, swallowed against pain that made her eyes water. I'll live. That's not what I asked. I'm hurt, but I'll survive it. Calethorn sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically, something deeper. The kind of tired that came from fighting battles on too many fronts. This shouldn't have happened, he said. You were supposed to be protected, safe. Nothing in this fortress is safe. We both know that. Still, my guards, my people. And one of them just tried to kill you in your sleep. He thinks I'm making you weak. Calethorn's laugh was harsh, bitter. Maybe he's right. The words hit like a physical blow. Lysera stared at him. What? Every decision I've made since you arrived has been about keeping you alive. Every concession to the court, every show of control, all of it designed to protect one human girl who shouldn't matter, but somehow does. His hands clenched into fists. A month ago, I would have killed half the court for questioning my judgment, would have crushed any challenge without hesitation. Now I'm calculating risks, weighing outcomes, trying to find ways to keep you safe while maintaining power. And that hesitation? That's weakness. Corvin saw it. Vaedric sees it. Probably everyone sees it. So what are you saying? Calethorn met her eyes, and what she saw there made her chest ache. I'm saying maybe sending you back to Dravenhall is the right call. Not because you're worthless. Because keeping you here is destroying everything I've built. The silence that followed felt like falling. Lysera's mind raced. This was it. The moment where everything collapsed. Where the protection she'd relied on evaporated and she was left with nothing but the truth she'd always known. She didn't belong here, never had. And trying to force it was going to get them both killed. But there was something else underneath the fear. Something that felt like anger. You said I was under your protection, she said quietly. You said anyone who touched me answered to you. Was that a lie? No. Then act like it. Because right now you're doing exactly what Corvin wanted. You're letting fear make your decisions instead of strategy. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. The words hung in the air between them. Dangerous. Potentially fatal. Calethorn's eyes flashed. His jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, Lysera thought she'd pushed too far. That he'd actually hurt her. But then something shifted in his expression. The anger remained, but it redirected, turned inward instead of out. "You're right," he said, "and that's worse than being wrong." He stood, paced to the window, stared out at darkness. "I've been king for 7 years," he said. "Built this empire on fear and violence and absolute control. Never hesitated, never doubted, just took what I wanted and crushed anyone who stood in my way." He turned back to face her. "Then you walked into my fortress, and everything changed. Suddenly I care whether someone lives or dies. Suddenly I'm making decisions based on emotion instead of strategy. And I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to be both the king this realm needs and the man who wants to keep you safe." Lysera stood, walked to him despite the pain screaming through her body. "Then stop trying to be both. Choose. And if I choose wrong, then we deal with the consequences, but at least we'll know where we stand." Kelthorn studied her face, searching for something. Certainty, maybe. Or just the courage to take the next step. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, resolved. "You're staying. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. No more hesitation. No more calculating risks. Just absolute commitment." "What about Vaedrix? Corvin said he acted alone, but we both know that's probably a lie." Kelthorn's smile was sharp, dangerous. "Then we smoke out the conspiracy. Find everyone involved, and remind this court what happens to people who forget who's in charge." He pulled her against him, not gently, with the kind of possessive intensity that made her breath catch. "You're mine now," he said against her hair, "not as property, as necessity. And I protect what's mine with everything I have." Lysera should have been afraid of that intensity, should have recognized it as the kind of obsession that destroyed everything it touched. But instead, she felt something else. Something that felt dangerously like relief, because for the first time since arriving in this fortress, she wasn't alone in the fight. The next morning, Kelthorn convened an emergency council session. Not the full court, just his inner circle, the alphas he trusted most, or thought he trusted. They assembled in a smaller chamber, 12 seats arranged around a circular table. Kelthorn sat at the head. Lysera stood behind him, a position that marked her as his but also as separate, not quite equal but no longer disposable. Lord Vaedrix was there. Of course he was. Sitting 3 seats to the right with expression that revealed nothing. Kelthorn didn't waste time on pleasantries. "One of my guards tried to kill Lysera last night. He claimed to act alone, for the good of the realm. I'm going to give everyone in this room one chance to come clean. If you were involved, speak now. The punishment will be severe but survivable. If you stay silent and I find out later, there won't be enough left of you to bury." The silence that followed was absolute. Lysera watched the assembled alphas, looked for tells, for signs of guilt or complicity. Most of them looked genuinely shocked, horrified even. This was their king threatening execution, and they believed him. But Vaedrix's expression didn't change, didn't even flicker. That was the tell. Not reaction, but the absence of it, like he'd known this was coming and had prepared his response in advance. "My king," Vaedrix said carefully, "this is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence of conspiracy or just paranoia?" Kelthorn's eyes went cold. "I have a dead guard in my cells who was willing to commit treason. That's evidence enough. One man's actions don't implicate the entire council." "No. But they suggest someone put the idea in his head. Someone convinced him that killing Lysera would serve the realm. And you think that someone is in this room?" "I think this room is the only place where that kind of thinking would take root." Vaedrix leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, the picture of calm rationality. "With respect, my king, perhaps the problem isn't conspiracy. Perhaps it's the girl herself. Her presence has created division, uncertainty. Some of your people see her as a liability, and when leadership becomes focused on protecting one individual over the collective, tension builds. This attack, tragic as it is, might be a symptom of that larger problem." He paused. Let the words sink in. Perhaps the solution is to address the root cause rather than hunting shadows. The other alphas shifted in their seats, not agreeing overtly, but not disagreeing either. Kelthorn's hands clenched on the table. Lysera could see the effort it took him not to tear Vaedrix apart where he sat. "You're suggesting I send her away. I'm suggesting you consider what's best for the realm. Personal attachments are luxuries kings can't afford. And if I refuse? Vadrix smiled. It was the saddest expression Lysera had ever seen. Then you'll discover that even absolute power has limits. That kings who forget to serve their people eventually find themselves without kingdoms to rule. The threat was clear, veiled in concern but unmistakable. Calethorn stood. The movement was controlled, but every alpha in the room felt the violence simmering underneath. This council is dismissed. You have until sunset tomorrow to bring me evidence of who else was involved in last night's attempt. Anyone found to be withholding information will be treated as complicit. The alphas filed out, most quickly, eager to escape the tension. Vadrix lingered, caught Lysera's eye as he passed. You're a survivor, girl. I respect that. But survival sometimes means knowing when to walk away. Think about it. Then he was gone. Lysera and Calethorn stood alone in the chamber. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. He's going to move against you, Lysera said quietly. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, it won't be direct. It'll be something we don't see coming. I know. So what do we do? Calethorn turned to face her. His expression was set, determined. We changed the game. Stop playing defense. Start showing this court that protecting you isn't weakness, it's strategy. That you're not a liability. You're the only thing keeping their king from losing control completely. How? By letting them see what happens when I don't have you to manage the curse. Let them understand that losing you means losing me. And without me, this entire empire collapses into chaos and civil war. That's dangerous. Everything worth doing is. But before they could plan further, a guard burst through the doors. His face was pale, eyes wide with something that looked like horror. My king, you need to come to the cells, now. What happened? It's Corvin. He's dead. And the message he left before he died changes everything. They ran through the corridors, down into the depths of the fortress where the cells were carved into bedrock. The air grew colder with each step, damper, like descending into the earth's throat. The cell where they'd held Corvin was open. Guards stood outside, looking sick. Calethorn pushed past them. Corvin hung from the bars, dead. A strip torn from his own shirt wrapped around his neck. Suicide by hanging. But it was what he'd written on the wall in his own blood that made Lysera's stomach drop. 6 words, scrawled in shaking letters that spoke to a man who'd known he was dying and wanted one final message delivered. Lord Vadrix commands. The king serves. Calethorn stared at the words. His breathing had gone shallow. Fast. This isn't proof, he said. It's accusation. Could be designed to frame Vadrix, to create division. Or it's the truth, Lysera countered. And Corvin died knowing you'd dismiss it as conspiracy. Calethorn's hands were shaking. The dark lines across his chest had started to pulse. The curse feeding on stress and rage. If Vadrix is behind this, if he's been orchestrating rebellion from within my own council, then everything I've built is compromised. Every decision, every alliance, all of it potentially corrupted. So what do you do? The question hung in the cold air of the cell, because this was the moment where kings either rose to challenges or broke under them. Calethorn looked at the blood-written message, at the dead guard who'd chosen to implicate his patron with his final breath. And slowly, his expression hardened into something Lysera had never seen before. Not rage, not control. Something beyond both. Absolute resolve. I call a tribunal, he said. Force Vadrix to answer these accusations in front of the full court. If he's innocent, the realm needs to see it. If he's guilty, everyone needs to watch him fall. And if the court sides with him instead of you, then we find out if loyalty to a king is stronger than fear of change. This was it. The point where everything shifted, where the game stopped being about survival and became about something far more dangerous. Revolution. Because challenging Vadrix wasn't just challenging one alpha, it was challenging the entire old order. The system that had kept this empire stable for generations. And systems like that didn't fall quietly. They burned, taking everything and everyone with them. The tribunal convened at dawn. Not in the council hall, but in the arena where blood challenges had been settled for 300 years. Stone walls rising 50 feet on all sides, no roof, just open sky the color of ash and iron. Lysera stood in the preparation chamber and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Through the narrow window, she could see the assembled crowd, every alpha in the Northern Territories, every warrior who'd sworn loyalty to Calethorn. Hundreds of them packed into the stone tiers, their voices a low roar like distant thunder. This wasn't politics anymore. This was war conducted under the pretense of law. Calethorn entered without knocking. He wore armor that looked like it had been forged from midnight and regret. Black plate over black mail. No ornamentation, no crown, just functionality designed for violence. "How are you holding up?" His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Terrified. "You?" "Same." He crossed to the window, looked out at the crowd with expression that gave nothing away. "Vaedrix will come prepared," he said. "He's had 3 days to gather support, build his case, turn public opinion against us." "Against me, you mean?" "Against us," Calethorn corrected. "You stopped being separate the moment you touched my curse and survived. We're in this together now, all the way to whatever end is waiting. And if the court sides with him, then we fight our way out and burn this empire to the ground on our way north. There are territories beyond the ice line where council law doesn't reach. We could disappear. Start over." Lysera turned to look at him, saw the truth in his face. "You'd actually do it. Give up everything you've built rather than let them have me." Without hesitation. There's a particular kind of madness that comes from loving something more than power. Most people never experience it because most people never have both. They live their entire lives choosing between what they want and what they need, never understanding that the two can become the same thing. But when you reach the apex of power, when you've conquered everything worth conquering and crushed everyone worth crushing, you discover something terrifying. The throne doesn't fill the emptiness. The crown doesn't make you whole. You're still just a person sitting alone in a room made of stone and obligation, wondering if this is all there is. And then someone comes along who sees past the armor, who touches the pain you've been carrying and somehow makes it bearable, who looks at you like you're still human underneath all the violence. That's when power stops being enough. When you start making decisions that don't make strategic sense but feel right anyway. When you realize that losing this one person would hurt worse than losing everything else combined. That's not strength. It's not weakness either. It's just truth in its rawest form. And truth like that is dangerous. Because it means you're no longer in control. You're no longer calculating risks and weighing outcomes. You're just holding on to the one thing that matters and praying it doesn't get ripped away. A horn sounded outside. 3 blasts. The call to assembly. "It's time," Calethorn said. "Wait." Lysera crossed to him, reached up and pulled his face down until their foreheads touched. She could feel his breath against her skin, could smell the leather and steel, and underneath it, the scent that was just him. "Whatever happens out there," she said quietly, "I need you to know something. I didn't come north expecting to matter. Didn't come here thinking I'd find anything except a slower way to die. But you made me feel like I was worth fighting for, like being broken wasn't the end of my story. And that's worth more than survival. That's worth everything." Calethorn's hands came up to frame her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "If we survive this," he said, "I'm keeping you. Not as an alliance, not as strategy. Just because the thought of losing you makes me want to tear the world apart. Then let's make sure we survive." They walked into the arena together, side by side. The crowd's roar intensified when they appeared. Not cheering, not exactly, just noise. The sound of hundreds of predators watching something that might turn into blood sport. Vaedrix waited in the center of the arena. He wasn't alone. 6 alphas flanked him, all older, all bearing the scars of decades spent clawing their way to positions of power. The old guard, the foundation this empire had been built on. They stood in formation like soldiers preparing for war, which Lysera supposed they were. A neutral arbiter stepped forward. Elder Korvask, the oldest living alpha in the Northern Territories. His face looked like weathered stone, and his eyes had seen empires rise and fall. "We convene this tribunal under ancient law," he announced. "King Calethorn Virex accuses Lord Vaedrix of conspiracy to commit treason. The evidence will be presented, arguments heard, and judgment rendered by those assembled." He gestured to the crowd. "This is not tyranny. This is justice as our ancestors intended. Let all bear witness." Calethorn stepped forward. His voice carried across the arena without effort. 3 nights ago, one of my personal guards attempted to murder Lysera Vale while she slept. Before taking his own life, he left a message implicating Lord Vadrix as the architect of this conspiracy. I call this tribunal to determine the truth and render appropriate consequences. Vadrix's expression didn't change. He looked almost bored. My king, he said, with all due respect, the accusations of a dead traitor hardly constitute evidence. Corvin acted alone out of misguided loyalty. His attempt to implicate me was either madness or deliberate misdirection. Then explain how he bypassed 12 guards and 3 locked doors to reach Lysera's chambers, Kael Thorne countered. Explain how he knew which wing she was housed in when that information was restricted to inner circle only. Vadrix smiled. It was the kind of smile that came before knives. Perhaps your security is less effective than you believe. Perhaps the girl isn't as well protected as you think. Or perhaps there are those within your own household who question the wisdom of allowing a human to influence a king. The crowd murmured, agreement rippling through the assembled alphas. Lysera felt the shift in the air. They were losing ground. Vadrix was reframing the narrative from conspiracy to incompetence, making this about Kael Thorne's judgment rather than his own treason. I have evidence, she said, loud enough to carry. Every eye in the arena turned to her. Vadrix's smile tightened. The girl speaks out of turn. The girl has a name, Lysera shot back. And the girl was there when Corvin died, was there when he wrote his final message. And the girl can tell you things about that night that prove conspiracy beyond any doubt. Elder Korvask raised his hand. Speak then, but choose your words carefully. False testimony in tribunal carries penalties you don't want to experience. Lysera stepped forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice stayed steady. Corvin wasn't acting on misguided loyalty. He was following orders. Orders that came from someone with enough authority to make a loyal guard believe that killing me served the realm. Someone who'd been whispering in ears and planting seeds of doubt about the king's fitness to rule. Someone who saw my ability to manage Kael Thorne's curse as a threat to their own power. She turned to face Vadrix directly. Someone who's been positioning himself to take the throne the moment Kael Thorne finally loses control. The silence that followed was absolute. Vadrix's expression went cold, hard, the mask of civility dropping to reveal something far more dangerous underneath. You have no proof of these accusations, just conjecture and desperation. The wild theories of someone trying to avoid being sent back to the kingdom that discarded her. I have proof, Lysera said, the kind that doesn't require written evidence or witness testimony, the kind your arrogance won't let you deny. What proof? Show them what you're hiding. Vadrix's jaw clenched. I'm hiding nothing. Then remove your shirt. Let the assembled court see your chest, unless there's something there you don't want them to see. The crowd stirred, confused, curious. Vadrix didn't move. This is absurd. I won't submit to humiliation based on baseless— Remove it, Kael Thorne ordered. His voice carried the weight of absolute command, or I'll have it removed for you. For a moment, Lysera thought Vadrix would refuse, would force this into violence before the truth came out. But then, slowly, he reached for the clasps of his tunic. The crowd went silent. Vadrix pulled the fabric aside, revealed his chest, and there, spreading from his sternum like cracks in glass, were dark lines identical to the ones Kael Thorne bore. The curse. The arena erupted, alphas shouting, demanding explanations. The noise was deafening. Lysera's voice cut through the chaos. You have the same curse, the same affliction that's been eating Kael Thorne alive for 3 years. But yours is further along, deeper, which means you've had it longer, which means you know exactly what it is and how it works. She turned to address the assembled court. And when I showed up with the ability to manage that curse, to give relief where nothing else could, you saw me as a threat. Because if I could help Kael Thorne, I could expose that you're suffering the same affliction, could reveal that you're just as compromised as the king you're trying to replace. Vadrix's expression twisted, rage breaking through decades of practiced control. You know nothing about what you're dealing with, girl. This curse is older than your bloodline, older than this kingdom. It's the price of apex power, the cost of dominance. Every true alpha eventually faces it, the choice between controlling it or being consumed by it. Then why hide it? Kael Thorne demanded. Vadrix's laugh was bitter, sharp. Because admitting weakness gets you killed. Because the moment the court sees fractures in your armor, They start calculating how to replace you. You of all people should understand that, my king. He gestured to Lysera. She's not salvation. She's a temporary bandage on a wound that can't be healed. And the more you rely on her, the weaker you become, the more compromised. Until eventually you're not a king anymore. Just a man dependent on someone who has no real power of her own. Is that what happened to you? Kael'thorne asked quietly. Did you try to manage it alone? Is that why it's consuming you faster? Vadrix's silence was answer enough. I've ruled longer than you've been alive, he said finally. Survived challenges that would have destroyed lesser men. And I did it through strength, through never showing weakness, through understanding that power demands sacrifice. He turned to address the crowd. This tribunal is a farce. The king has been compromised by attachment to a human girl who can't even shift. His judgment is clouded, his priorities skewed. And if we allow this to continue, this empire will collapse from within. What are you proposing? Elder Korvask asked. Vadrix straightened, drew himself to full height. I challenge King Kael'thorne Virex for the throne. Single combat. Apex dominance. Winner takes the crown and the right to determine what happens to the girl. Loser forfeits everything, including life. The crowd exploded. This was what they'd come to see, what they'd been waiting for. Not political maneuvering, but primal resolution. The old way. The way that predated law and civilization. Blood challenge. Kael'thorne's expression didn't change, but Lysera could see the dark lines on his chest beginning to pulse, the curse feeding on stress and rage. I accept, he said. When? Now. Elder Korvask raised his hands. Both parties have agreed to blood challenge under ancient law. The terms are clear. Single combat to the death. No interference, no surrender. Fight until one of you can't continue. He stepped back. Begin. Vadrix shifted immediately. No hesitation. No buildup. Just instant transformation from man to massive gray wolf with eyes that burned silver. The curse spread with the shift, the dark lines covering half his body, pulsing, feeding. But he was still in control, still moving with precision and intent. Kael'thorne shifted to meet him. The transformation was smoother than Lysera had seen before, like he'd been preparing for this, conserving strength. The black wolf and this gray circled each other, two apex predators evaluating, calculating. Then Vadrix attacked. He moved faster than should have been possible for something his size, closed the distance in a blur and slammed into Kael'thorne with force that would have shattered stone. They went down in a tangle of fur and fangs, rolling across the arena floor, each trying to find the throat. The kill strike. Blood spattered the stone. Whose? Lysera couldn't tell. The crowd roared, primitive, hungry. This was what they understood, what they respected. Not politics or strategy, but raw violence. Kael'thorne got his jaws around Vadrix's shoulder, bit down, tore. Vadrix howled, twisted, got his back legs under Kael'thorne's belly and kicked, sent the black wolf flying. Both scrambled to their feet, bleeding, panting. They circled again, slower now, conserving energy. Lysera watched with hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. She wanted to help, wanted to do something, but interference meant disqualification, meant death for Kael'thorne. So she stood and watched the man she'd come to need more than safety tear himself apart in the center of an arena full of people who wanted to see him fall. Vadrix attacked again, low, going for the legs. Kael'thorne jumped, came down on Vadrix's back, jaws closing around the back of his neck. But Vadrix was older, more experienced. He'd survived decades of challenges. He rolled, used his weight to crush Kael'thorne against the stone, breaking the hold. They separated, both limping now, both bleeding from a dozen wounds. The curse on Vadrix's body had spread, was covering 3/4 of his form. He was running out of time, out of control. But so was Kael'thorne. The dark lines on his chest were blazing, spreading, the curse feeding on the violence, on the rage. This wasn't just combat. This was two men being consumed by the same affliction while trying to kill each other. And whoever lost control first would die. Vadrix lunged, jaws wide, going for Kael'thorne's throat. Kael'thorne met him head-on. They collided with impact that sounded like breaking bone. But this time, Kael'thorne didn't try to match strength, didn't try to overpower. He redirected, used Vadrix's momentum against him, twisted and threw the gray wolf into the arena wall. Vedrix hit hard, crumpled, tried to rise. Couldn't. The curse had finally consumed too much. His body was shutting down, collapsing under the weight of power it couldn't sustain. Calethorn approached slowly, still in wolf form, still bleeding, but mobile, functional. He stood over Vedrix, jaws around the fallen alpha's throat. One bite. That's all it would take, one crushing motion, and this would be over. But Calethorn hesitated, because killing Vedrix wouldn't solve the underlying problem, wouldn't cure the curse, wouldn't make the Empire stable. It would just prove that violence was still the answer, that nothing had changed. Lysera moved without thinking, walked into the arena, into the space where interference was forbidden. The crowd gasped, shouted, but she ignored them. She crossed to where Calethorn stood over Vedrix, knelt beside the fallen wolf, and pressed her hand against his chest. The curse hit her like a tidal wave, worse than Calethorn's, exponentially worse, because Vedrix had been fighting it alone for decades, had let it burrow so deep into his essence that separating the man from the affliction was nearly impossible. Lysera's vision grayed, her body screamed protest, blood poured from her nose, hot and copper-tasting. But she held on, because she understood something the assembled alphas didn't, something even Calethorn was still learning. Power wasn't about who could hurt the most. It was about who could endure, who could carry weight that should have broken them and still choose mercy over vengeance. The curse began to recede. Not gone. Still there. But pulled back enough that Vedrix could breathe, could think. He shifted back to human, lay on the stone floor gasping, broken, bleeding, but alive. Calethorn shifted back as well, stood over him with expression that carried no triumph, just exhaustion. Yield, he said quietly. Vedrix stared up at him, at Lysera, at the blood-soaked arena that should have been his victory, and slowly, painfully, he bared his throat. Submission. The crowd erupted, but this time the noise wasn't bloodlust. It was something else. Confusion. Maybe even respect, because they'd just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. A blood challenge that ended with mercy instead of death. A human girl stopping a curse that should have killed her. A king choosing restraint over dominance. It didn't fit the patterns, didn't follow the rules, and that made it dangerous. Made it revolutionary. Elder Corvas stepped forward. His ancient face was unreadable. The challenge is concluded. King Calethorn Virex retains the throne. Lord Vedrix submits and accepts judgment. He turned to Calethorn. What sentence do you pass? Calethorn looked at Vedrix, at the old alpha who'd tried to orchestrate his downfall, who'd nearly succeeded. When you stand at the apex of power, every decision becomes a statement. Every choice echoes through the empire you've built. Show mercy, and you risk looking weak. Show brutality, and you prove you're the monster they fear. But there's a third option, one that requires more strength than either extreme. You show them that power isn't binary, that you can be both strong enough to kill and wise enough to choose something else, that the throne isn't just about dominance, it's about understanding when to break the rules you've been following. Because the truth is, the old ways are dying. The empire built on fear and violence is crumbling, and the leaders who survive the transition won't be the ones who hold on tightest to tradition. They'll be the ones brave enough to evolve. Exile, Calethorn said. You leave the northern territories, take your allies, go beyond the council's reach. Live out whatever time the curse allows you. But if you ever return, if you ever threaten what I'm building here, there won't be mercy a second time. Vedrix's eyes widened. He'd expected death, had prepared for it. This was worse. This was being forced to live with failure, to survive the shame of losing. Why? He rasped. Because killing you proves I'm strong, Calethorn said. Letting you live proves I'm stronger. He turned to address the assembled court. The old ways are dead. The empire built on dominance and fear ends today. What comes next will be different, harder. It'll require trust instead of terror, partnership instead of subjugation, and anyone who can't adapt gets left behind. The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Then one alpha stood, then another, then a dozen, not cheering, not celebrating, just acknowledging, bearing witness to the shift. Calethorn helped Lysera to her feet. She could barely stand. Her body had been pushed past every limit. Blood covered her face and hands. Her vision swam. But she'd done it. They'd done it. Survived the impossible, changed the rules, started something that couldn't be stopped. They made it out of the arena before Lysera collapsed. Kelthorn caught her, lifted her like she weighed nothing, carried her through corridors that blurred together into stone and shadow. She was aware of voices, of hands checking her pulse, of being laid on something soft. Then nothing. When she woke, she was in chambers she didn't recognize, larger than the ones she'd been given, windows that looked out on mountains instead of courtyards. Kelthorn sat beside the bed, still in his armor, still covered in blood from the fight. How long? Her voice came out rough, scraped raw. 2 days. You've been unconscious for 2 days. The healer said you burned yourself out, that taking Vadrix's curse while your body was already exhausted should have killed you, but it didn't. No, it didn't. He reached out, brushed hair from her face with fingers that trembled slightly. You saved his life after everything he did, everything he tried to do. You still saved him, because killing him would have been easy, would have proven we're no different than what came before. And are we? Different? Lysera met his eyes, saw the question underneath the question, the fear that changing the rules meant losing control, that mercy was just weakness wearing a prettier mask. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but we're going to find out. A knock at the door interrupted them. Drace entered without waiting for permission. My king, we have a situation. What kind? The southern border. Dravenhall has sent an envoy. They're demanding Lysera's return, claiming the marriage treaty was violated when you failed to complete the bonding ceremony. They're threatening war if we don't comply. Kelthorn's expression went cold, hard. Let them come. Let Dravenhall send every warrior they have. I'll meet them at the border and show them what happens when they make demands of my kingdom. No, Lysera said. Both men turned to look at her. She pushed herself upright. Her body screamed protest, but she ignored it. If you go to war over me, everything we just accomplished falls apart. The court will see it as proof that I'm making you weak, that attachment is destroying your judgment. So what do you suggest? I go back. The silence that followed felt like falling. Kelthorn's jaw clenched. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair hard enough that the wood creaked. No, it's the only way. I go back. Face my father. Show him that I'm not the broken thing he discarded anymore. And then I make my own choice about where I belong. You're talking about walking into the kingdom that threw you away. That tried to use you as a sacrifice. They won't just let you leave. Then I make them. But I have to try. Because if I don't, we'll always wonder if this was real or if it was just two people clinging to each other because the alternative was dying alone. Kelthorn stood, crossed to her, grabbed her face with both hands. I'm not losing you. Not to them. Not to anyone. Then come with me. Not as an army. Just you. We face them together. Show them that the girl they threw away came back stronger than they could imagine. And if they try to keep you? His smile was sharp, dangerous. The king instead of the man. Then Dravenhall learns the same lesson everyone else who's challenged me has learned. That I don't lose. And I especially don't lose what's mine. Lysera leaned into his touch, let herself take comfort in the certainty of his presence. Then we leave at dawn. And we end this. One way or another. Because the truth they'd both been avoiding was this. You couldn't build something new on foundation that was still crumbling. Couldn't move forward while the past kept reaching out to drag you back. So they'd return to where it started. Face the people who'd tried to destroy them. And prove that survival wasn't enough anymore. They wanted more. Demanded more. And they'd burn down anyone who tried to stop them from taking it. The only question left was whether Dravenhall would bend or break. And how much blood would be spilled finding out. They rode south under skies that looked like the world was preparing for something it couldn't take back. Just the two of them. No guards. No entourage. Just Kelthorn and Lysera on horses that ate up the miles between kingdoms like they understood the urgency. 3 days of hard riding, 3 days of silence broken only by the sound of hooves on stone and wind through trees that had seen empires rise and fall. On the third night, they camped in the borderlands. Territory that belonged to neither kingdom. Neutral ground that felt anything but neutral. Lysera sat by the fire and watched Calethorn sharpen his blade with movements that were more meditation than maintenance. The rasp of steel on whetstone was the only sound besides crackling wood. "You don't have to do this," he said without looking up. "We could turn around, go back north. Let Dravenhall make whatever threats they want. They won't actually invade. The cost would be too high. And spend the rest of our lives wondering if I ran because I was smart or because I was scared? There's no shame in choosing survival over pride." Lysera poked at the fire with a stick, sent sparks spiraling into darkness. "This isn't about pride. It's about proving that the girl they threw away isn't the same person anymore. That I survived what should have killed me and came out stronger for it. You don't have anything to prove. Not to them. Not to anyone. Maybe not. But I need to prove it to myself." Calethorn set down the whetstone, looked at her with eyes that carried weight she couldn't quite name. "What if they don't let you leave? What if your father sees you as property he's owed back? Then you'll show them why that was a mistake." His smile was sharp, dangerous. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat in silence for a while. The fire burned down to embers. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns that predated language. "Can I ask you something?" Lysera said finally. "Anything. Do you regret it? Accepting me when my father sent me north? If you'd refused, none of this would have happened. No conspiracy, no tribunal, no exile. Your empire would still be stable." Calethorn was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of honesty that only comes in darkness. 3 months ago, I would have said yes. Would have looked at the chaos you've caused and calculated it wasn't worth the cost. But that was before I understood what I was trading, before I knew that stability built on fear is just slow collapse, disguised as strength. He stood, crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her. "You didn't just help me manage the curse. You showed me that power without purpose is just violence wearing a crown. That being feared isn't the same as being respected, and that the strongest thing a king can do is admit he can't do it alone." His hands found hers, rough calluses against her palms. "So no, I don't regret it, not for a second, even if it all falls apart tomorrow, even if we don't survive what's coming. These months with you have been more real than the 7 years before them." Lysera's throat tightened. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't shifter enough, wasn't worth the space she occupied. And here was the most powerful alpha in the North telling her she was the best thing that ever happened to him. "If we survive this," she said quietly, "I want to try. Really try. Not as political alliance or curse management, just as two people who found something worth fighting for." Calethorn pulled her against him, held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. "Then we survive, whatever it takes." They crossed into Dravenhall territory at midday. The border guards recognized them immediately, sent runners ahead with news that would reach the capital before they did. The landscape shifted as they rode deeper into familiar territory. Black glass towers rising in the distance, forges burning day and night, the smell of ash and ambition heavy in the air. Lysera had been gone less than 4 months. It felt like a lifetime. They reached the city gates at sunset, found them open, waiting. Her father stood in the courtyard with the full council arrayed behind him. 47 alphas in formal dress. The same faces that had sentenced her to exile disguised as a marriage. Lord Heswick was there, Councillor Drentha. All the architects of her disposal. And at the center, wearing the crown she'd never thought she'd see again, was her father. He looked older, harder, like the months since she'd left had carved lines in his face that wouldn't smooth out. Lysera dismounted, stood before the assembled council with Calethorn at her side. The silence stretched, became unbearable. Finally, her father spoke. "You were sent north to secure an alliance, not to return making demands. I'm not making demands. I'm offering a choice. You're in no position to offer anything. You're property of the Vale bloodline. Contracted to King Virex through treaty, your presence here violates." Calethorn's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She's not property. She's a sovereign individual who's free to go wherever she chooses. And right now, she's chosen to face the people who tried to throw her away." Her father's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your territory, Virex. You have no authority here. I have the authority she grants me, and that's more than you've ever had." Heswick stepped forward, his hand on his sword. Careful, Northern King. You're one man surrounded by 47 alphas who could tear you apart before you finish shifting. Kelthorn smiled. It was the most dangerous expression Lysera had ever seen on a human face. You're welcome to try. See what happens when you threaten someone I've claimed as mine. Spoiler. It ends with me standing in a pile of bodies and you wondering why you thought numbers mattered. The council shifted, hands moving toward weapons, the kind of restless energy that preceded violence. Stop! Lysera's voice rang out across the courtyard, not loud, but absolute. Everyone froze. She walked forward, past Kelthorn's protective stance, past the guards who stood ready to enforce her father's will, stopped directly in front of the man who'd sired her and never quite figured out how to be her father. You sent me north to die with dignity, she said, to be the sacrifice that bought you an alliance you didn't deserve. You looked at your daughter and saw a problem that needed solving, a stain on the bloodline that was easier to hide than heal. Her father's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I did what was necessary for the realm. No. You did what was easiest for you. What let you maintain the illusion that power is measured in how many people can shift instead of how many can survive what should have broken them? She gestured back toward Kelthorn. That man has more power in his smallest finger than this entire council combined. He could have sent me back in pieces the moment I arrived, could have used me as leverage or threat or just entertainment. Instead, he saw what you never could. That being human doesn't make me weak. It makes me the only person capable of doing what no shifter ever could. What's that? Drentha asked, her voice dripping skepticism. Surviving without the crutch you all depend on. Existing in a world that worships strength without becoming a monster to earn respect. And more than that, helping the strongest alpha alive understand that power without connection is just isolation wearing a crown. The courtyard had gone silent. Even the guards had stopped moving. Lysera turned to address the full council. I came back to tell you something, to make sure you understood what you lost when you threw me away. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not begging to be welcomed back. I'm just making it clear that the girl you discarded became something you never expected. Someone valuable enough that the most feared king in the north would ride into hostile territory to stand beside her. She looked at her father again. So here's your choice. You can try to claim me as property. Try to enforce the treaty you used to get rid of me. And when you do, Kelthorn will show you why that's the last mistake you'll ever make. Or you can acknowledge that I'm no longer yours to control, that I walked out of your kingdom broken and came back whole. And that the alliance you wanted was never about me marrying him. It was about two kingdoms learning to respect each other. Her father stared at her, really looked, maybe for the first time in her life. And slowly, something in his expression cracked. You've changed. Yes. Are you happy? The question caught her off guard, because it was the first time he'd ever asked about her happiness instead of her usefulness. I'm alive, she said. I'm valued. I matter to someone in ways that don't require me to be something I'm not. So yes, I'm happy. Her father nodded, just once, a gesture so small it barely registered. Then you should go. Back north. Back to whatever life you've built there. And Dravenhall will honor the alliance. Not because of treaty, because you've proven you're worth respecting on your own terms. Wait. Torian stepped out from the crowd. Her brother. The Golden Sun. The one who'd always been everything she wasn't. He walked to her, pulled her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. I'm proud of you, he whispered against her hair. Prouder than I've ever been of anything. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the best. That's strength the council will never understand. Lysera held on to him, let herself take comfort in the connection they'd always had despite everything trying to break it. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. Don't be a stranger. And if he ever hurts you, pointing at Kelthorn, I'll make good on that promise about burning kingdoms. Noted, Kelthorn said dryly, but there was respect in his voice, recognition of one protector acknowledging another. Lysera turned to her father one last time. Thank you for letting me go. It's more than I expected. Her father's smile was sad, resigned. It's less than you deserved, but it's the best I can offer. She nodded, turned, walked back to where Kelthorn waited with the horses. As they mounted, Heswick called out, Girl, what you said about surviving without shifting, about being strong in ways we can't measure. Do you really believe that? Lysera looked at him, at the man who'd choked her in the council chamber, who told her she existed only because they allowed it. I don't believe it. I know it. Because I'm still here, and most of the people who tried to break me aren't. They rode out through gates that had once marked the boundary of her entire world, past towers that had watched her grow from child to exile, through streets where she'd learned that being different was the same as being disposable. And with each mile that fell behind them, Lysera felt something shift, not just in her body, but in her understanding of what home meant. It wasn't a place, wasn't walls or bloodlines or kingdoms drawn on maps. It was the space between two people who'd survived enough together to understand that love wasn't softness. It was the decision to keep choosing each other even when everything else was falling apart. They made camp that night in the same clearing where they'd stopped on the way south, full circle, ending where they'd started this particular journey. Kelthorn built a fire while Lysera tended the horses. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. When the fire was burning steady and the horses were settled, they sat together in silence. "So," Kelthorn said eventually, "what now? Now we go home. Build something that doesn't rely on fear or dominance or any of the old ways. Show the North that power can evolve, that empires don't have to be built on bones. That's a tall order. Good thing we've gotten used to doing the impossible." He pulled her against him. She fit against his side like she'd been designed for that exact space. "I meant what I said back there," he murmured, "about claiming you, about standing in a pile of bodies if anyone tried to take you. I would have done it, would have burned Dravenhall to the ground if your father had refused to let you go. I know. That's why he let me leave. He saw that you meant it, that you'd actually trade everything for one person. And that kind of commitment is terrifying to people who've never experienced it." Kelthorn was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she'd never expected to hear from a king. "I love you. Not because you manage my curse or because you make me stronger. I love you because you looked at me when I was coming apart and decided I was worth saving. Because you walked into a fortress built on violence and somehow made it feel like home. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met and you don't even realize it." Lysera's breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Because here's the truth about love that no one tells you when you're young and still believe in simple things. Love isn't romance. It isn't flowers and poetry and grand gestures designed to sweep you off your feet. Real love is terrifying. It's the moment you realize that someone else's survival matters more than your own. That you'd trade every comfort you've ever known for the privilege of standing beside them. That the thought of losing them hurts worse than any physical wound you could sustain. Love is vulnerability weaponized, is giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting they won't use it, is choosing to be known completely, flaws and fears and failures, and believing that what you are is enough. And when you find it, when you actually find the person who looks at your broken edges and sees potential instead of damage, you hold on. You fight. You endure whatever comes because the alternative is going back to existing instead of living. That's what Kelthorn was offering. Not safety, not stability, just the promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was worth more than kingdoms. "I love you too," Lysera said, "for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for making me feel like being human was enough, for choosing me over empire when it mattered most." She turned in his arms, pressed her forehead against his, "And I promise you this, I'll stand beside you through whatever comes, curse or conspiracy or civil war. I'll be the anchor when you're drowning and the voice that reminds you who you are when you forget. Because you gave me a life worth living, and I'm going to spend every day proving that faith wasn't misplaced." They stayed like that until the fire burned to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who'd survived enough to understand that happily ever after wasn't a destination. It was a choice you made every morning when you woke up and decided that trying was worth more than surrender. Eventually, they slept, wrapped around each other against the cold, protected by nothing except the certainty that they'd rather die together than live apart. And when dawn came gray and hesitant, they rose and continued north. Toward the empire they were building from scratch. Toward the future no one thought was possible. Toward the kind of ending that was really just a beginning disguised as resolution. They reached the northern fortress a week later. found it changed in ways both subtle and significant. The guards at the gate no longer looked at Lysera like she was a curiosity or a threat. They looked at her like she was their queen. Not because Kael'thorne had ordered it, because she'd earned it by surviving what should have killed her. The court had convened in their absence. Drace met them in the entrance hall with news. Lord Vaedrix left yesterday, took his loyalists and headed for the Western Territories. He won't be back. Good, Kael'thorne said. And the others? Watching, waiting, trying to understand what comes next. What comes next is we rebuild. New rules, new structure. An empire that doesn't rely on fear to maintain order. That'll be harder than fighting. Everything worth doing is. They walked through corridors that felt different now. Still stone, still cold, but no longer oppressive. Like the fortress itself had exhaled after holding its breath for years. Lysera's chambers had been moved. She discovered this when Drace led them not to the sparse room where she'd spent those first terrifying nights, but to quarters adjacent to Kael'thorne's own. Larger, warmer, windows that caught morning light. The message was clear. She wasn't a guest anymore, wasn't temporary. She was permanent, foundational. That night, the council convened, not for tribunal or challenge, just for the first session of what Kael'thorne was calling the reconstruction. Lysera sat beside his throne, not behind, not below, beside, equal in everything except title. The assembled alphas watched with expressions ranging from acceptance to calculation. Change never came without resistance, but resistance could be managed. Kael'thorne addressed them with voice that carried the same authority it always had. But underneath, there was something new, something that sounded almost like hope. We've spent generations building power through dominance, maintaining order through fear, and it's worked. We've survived, conquered, built an empire that stretches from the ice line to the southern borders. He paused. Let the words settle. But survival isn't enough anymore. Conquest isn't sustainable. Fear corrodes from within. And if we don't evolve, we'll collapse under the weight of our own traditions. So starting today, we change. Not all at once, not without resistance, but deliberately, with purpose. He outlined the new structure, power shared instead of hoarded, decisions made collectively instead of unilaterally, strength measured not just in violence, but in stability, in prosperity, in the ability to endure without constantly proving dominance. It was radical, revolutionary, the kind of change that would take years to implement and decades to normalize. But it was also necessary, because the old ways were dying whether they acknowledged it or not, and leaders who couldn't adapt became cautionary tales instead of legends. The council listened. Some nodded, some frowned, none objected, because Kael'thorne had proven that he could enforce the old rules or establish new ones. And challenging him now, after everything, felt less like courage and more like suicide. When the session ended, Lysera and Kael'thorne walked the ramparts, looked out over the territories they'd fought to protect and reshape. Do you think it'll work? Lysera asked. The new structure? Kael'thorne considered the question, gave it the weight it deserved. I think it's got a better chance than continuing the way we were. Change is always risky, but stagnation is guaranteed failure. So we try, we adapt, and if it doesn't work, we adjust until it does. He turned to face her. The wind caught his hair, made him look younger, less like a king and more like a man trying to figure out how to do right by people who depended on him. None of this works without you. You know that, right? You're not just helping me manage the curse. You're the proof that the new way is possible, that strength comes in forms we haven't recognized, that the empire can evolve. I'm just one person. You're the person who changed everything. Own that. Lysera looked out at the mountains rising dark against the horizon, at the kingdom that had become home, not because she was born to it, but because she'd chosen it. And because the truth was, belonging wasn't about blood or birthplace. It was about finding the place where your presence mattered, where you could be fully yourself and still be valued. She'd found that here, in a fortress built on violence, with a king learning to rule with something other than fear. Surrounded by alphas slowly understanding that evolution was survival by another name. A year later, things had changed in ways both visible and subtle. The curse hadn't disappeared. It still pulsed beneath Kael'thorne's skin, still threatened to consume him when stress peaked or control slipped. But Lysera had learned to manage it better, had developed techniques that went beyond just absorbing pain. She'd learned to redistribute it, to help him process it instead of just bottling it up. They worked together every morning, a ritual that had become as essential as breathing, her hands on his chest, his breathing synced to hers, the curse receding enough to give him functionality without destroying him in the process. It wasn't a cure, but it was management, and management was enough. The council had adapted too, slowly, with resistance, but adapted nonetheless. Power was more distributed now. Decisions took longer because more voices had input, but they were better decisions, more stable, less likely to create the kind of resentment that bred conspiracy. Vaedrix's exile had become legend. The old guard had scattered, some had adapted, some had left. The empire had contracted slightly but strengthened in the process, and Lysera had become something she'd never expected. Not queen. Kelthorn had offered, but she'd refused. Titles felt like cages, like definitions that would limit instead of expand. But she was his partner, in everything, acknowledged, respected, the person who stood beside him when decisions needed making and challenges needed facing. She'd also discovered something unexpected about herself. The ability that had let her sense pain and fear and fractures, it was growing, evolving. She could do more than just absorb now. She could redirect, could channel, could take someone's suffering and transform it into something useful. Healing, some called it. Though that word felt too gentle for what she did. She thought of it more as alchemy, taking base materials and refining them into something stronger. On the anniversary of her arrival in the north, Kelthorn took her to the eastern cliffs, a place where the mountains dropped away into nothing, and you could see 3 kingdoms from the overlook. They stood in silence, watched the sun set over territories they'd fought to protect and reshape. "Do you ever regret it?" Kelthorn asked. "Staying here instead of going back to Dravenhall after your father released you?" Lysera thought about it, really considered. "I regret that it had to be this hard. That proving my value required surviving assassination and conspiracy and enough pain to kill most people. But I don't regret the outcome. Don't regret finding you. Finding this." She gestured to the empire spread below them. "A year ago, I was the broken daughter no one wanted. Now I'm the person who helps hold an empire together. That's not something I'd trade, even if it means carrying a curse that could kill you if you push too hard. Especially because of that. Because it means I'm necessary, valued, and that's worth every risk." Kelthorn pulled her against him. They stood like that until the sun disappeared and stars emerged like witnesses to promises made and kept. "I built this empire on violence," he said quietly, "took the throne through blood and maintained it through fear. And I thought that was strength. Thought dominance was the same as power. Then you showed me something different. Showed me that the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. That connection is more powerful than conquest. That the best leaders are the ones who make everyone around them stronger instead of just making themselves untouchable." He turned her to face him. The starlight caught in his eyes made them look almost gentle. "You saved my life. Multiple times, in multiple ways. But more than that, you saved me from becoming the monster everyone feared I'd turn into, and I'm spending the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice." Lysera reached up, touched his face with fingers that had learned to carry pain and transform it. "We saved each other. That's how this works. I couldn't have survived here without you. Couldn't have become who I am without someone believing I was worth the effort." They kissed under stars that had watched empires rise and fall. 2 people who'd survived enough to understand that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway. And when they finally pulled apart, Lysera looked out at the empire they were building together and understood something profound. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough, that being human made her less, that power was measured in fangs and claws and the ability to dominate. But she'd proven them all wrong, had become invaluable, not despite her humanity, but because of it, had shown an entire empire that strength came in forms they'd never recognized. And more than that, she'd found something worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth becoming more than she'd ever imagined possible. That was the real power, not dominance, not conquest, not even survival. It was transformation, the ability to take what should have destroyed you and forge it into something that made you stronger, to stand in the wreckage of who you used to be and build something better from the remains. That was what it meant to be truly powerful, to refuse to stay broken, to choose growth over comfort, to bet everything on the possibility that tomorrow could be better than today if you were willing to fight for it. And as she stood on that cliff with the man who'd become her partner in revolution, Lysera understood that this was just the beginning, that the empire they were building would take years, that resistance would continue, that challenges would come, but they'd face it together, would adapt and overcome and refuse to let anyone tell them that change was impossible. Because the greatest power wasn't the ability to conquer others, it was the ability to survive what should have destroyed you and rise anyway, to look at the world that tried to break you and decide that you were going to reshape it instead. And that was exactly what they were going to do. One day at a time, one decision at a time, until the empire built on fear became something worth believing in. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And because the best things in life were always the ones you had to fight for, the ones you earned through blood and sweat, and refusing to give up even when surrender would have been easier. That was their legacy. Not conquest, not dominance, but transformation, and it would echo through generations long after they were gone.